what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like live again right here on Black Power Media. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Happy again to be holding it down here at the 8 a.m. time slot until the Remix Morning Show crew reconvenes first thing tomorrow morning, as will be the case Wednesday and Thursday. And then I'll come back on Friday and again, just try to hold it down until we all get back. So please do call a friend, call a comrade, call a colleague, call an enemy, call your people, invite them on in. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel and help us continue to expand as we want to just keep growing. We got more people coming on, more shows, more programming. We definitely want to get more into investigative journalism, putting people on the ground where this kind of journalism is needed. And so the more support you can offer, the better, obviously, and the more we can do. Shout out to Soledad Jean-Baptiste. Welcome and thank you for joining. We appreciate you and invite others to do the same. Certainly good morning, De El Sendero, KD, Lisa, good morning. Silberg's in the building. Welcome, everybody. We have a great lineup this morning. And actually, speaking of Friday, very quickly, as a few of you all continue to come in, let me just say, I think I honestly don't remember if I've said this publicly. I can't remember, but I want to thank everybody who has helped push the myth and propaganda of Black buying power. Well over 70,000 downloads now, 70,000 digital downloads. So that's 7 chapters. So that roughly translates to well over 10,000 full copies digitally downloaded. Does not count all those who have bought the hard copies. Certainly appreciate that. And free or not, that just continues to show I think the importance of the argument and its importance to Black political discussion and discourse, and increasingly an international one, as I think the problems laid out in that book are easily transferable in terms of an analysis to the situation of African people wherever we find ourselves. So definitely want to thank everybody for that. It's a pretty big deal to me, at least, certainly given that there's been an odd silence in regard to the work in spaces where it would be expected to be discussed, if not even just for the sake of criticism. Anyway, so I definitely appreciate all of you. And again, I mixwhatilike.org. You can find the link there, get a free copy digitally, and please do. Friday, I'm excited because we're going to be talking here with Professor August Nimtz Jr. about a critique of Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism. So looking forward to that. Very interesting discussion. And from a Black Marxist point of view. So Professor reached out to me after seeing some programs and discussions, sent me a paper. It's very interesting, to say the least. Just want to continue the discussion. And given all the discussion of Robinson's very important work and racial capitalism, and even some of the discussion we had with Frank Chapman about his criticisms of Cedric Robinson, so of that work. So anyway, looking forward to that. And also we're going to be talking with journalist Barrett Brown. And if any of you are not familiar with him, this is, for me, one of the leading, journalists and critics of the digital media environment, of its relationship to the state, of its relationship now with new information he's going to share with us Friday, to the surveillance of activists, Black activists specifically. And but somebody who has worked in conjunction with the group Anonymous, who has been imprisoned for his work politically around trying to expose the state's involvement in our media environment, somebody whose work I've been following for a number of years. We spoke again this morning, and looking forward to this discussion we're going to have Friday morning, first thing 8 a.m. with Barrett Brown. So please do come on back and be sure to check that out. Later today, of course, in a little less than an hour, we're going to be joined by Dhoruba Bin-Wahad. And then after that, we're going to be joined by DaveyD for his criticism of my criticism of hip hop's historical narrative. So anyway, got a lot going on here. And then, of course, in between all of that is just this incredible morning show we've started, which will be picking back up again at 8 a.m. tomorrow, the remix, with a lot of incredible stuff happening. So anyway, stick around and continue to support Black Power Media. All right, that said, let's get into a couple of things with our next guests. Not the least of which are folks I'm sure many of you who are tuned in are already familiar. One of whom is Charo Mina Rojas, who is, among many other things, a human rights activist, the national coordinator of advocacy and outreach for Black communities Proceso de Comunidades, Negras, PCN, and a member of the Afro-Colombia Solidarity Network based in the United States. We're also going to be joined by the national organizer for Black Alliance for Peace, Ajamu Baraka. Two folks I haven't spoken to enough over the last few years, but it's good to be in some ways reunited with Charo. Ajamu, good morning to you both. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
So I thought, obviously we wanted you to lay out what's happening in Colombia, but I thought I would just start by asking you, or pointing out something that seems pretty obvious, that it seems that U.S. allies, as is the case with Colombia, seem to have a real problem with issues like democracy and redistribution among anti-Blackness. So what is going on in Colombia? And to the extent possible, what contextually has led us here with the protests and so on. Anyway, Charo, do you want to start and sort of bring us up to date?
Sure. Greetings to everyone from the Black ancestral territories of joy, freedom, hope, and life. And thank you again for having me in this program. Well, Colombia has been on a national strike since May 28. And of course, what ignited the strike in general was some of the reforms that this government is trying to impose. Some of them had to do with taxes, with health, with education, but also reforms that affect the collective rights of Black Afro-descendant people in Colombia, particularly territorial rights. This is happening also in the context of extreme violence in our territories. This is happening in a context of a government that is completely ignoring a peace accord and an ethnic chapter in that accord that will facilitate and resolve, or at least contribute to resolve, some of the social and economic issues that have people mobilizing today. So on all these days, people can see on the media how this government has been brutally repressing the demonstrations on the streets. We have been holding demonstrations in many cities in the country, and particularly Cali has been the epicenter of this repression. So police has been on the streets shooting, mostly in Black and poor neighborhoods in Cali. We have over 47 people killed during all these days. 35 of them are in Cali, people that have been in Cali, most of them from Black impoverished neighborhoods. And many disappeared. Many people have been arrested. We are holding a strike, the strike also in the rural areas, where besides the confrontation of police, we have to confront also the pressures of armed groups trying to take advantage of the demonstrations that people is having. So it's a context of militarized and very oppressive regime, if you wish. And this is mostly what is going on right now. Last night and yesterday, we have right-wing supporters of the President Ivan Duque in the streets of Cali in the south, shooting the indigenous and Maroon guards that were present supporting the demonstrations here in Cali. We had one indigenous, several injured, and I believe one probably dead. And we are expecting more attacks on this week if we continue holding the strike.
So on the surface, let me I think we gotta let me mute. We gotta I don't know if either of you have headphones and can put them on, please do. Otherwise, let me just mute you briefly while I raise the question so we don't get this echo. But Charo, if most immediately we're being told that the protests are starting as a result of Duque looking to impose further taxes. That even after apparently saying he would not do that, the protests continue. Is there? I think you've said some already, but to what extent is that sort of headline that we're getting a lot of here in the United States insufficient in describing the situation or the reasons why people would be continuing to protest even after the claim that he will not impose those taxes?
Yeah, and yes. Well, effectively, it's not just the taxes. And as I say, there are many reforms, including reforms that affect collective rights of indigenous and Afro-descendant people. But also as a situation that has been carried on for several years. During the 3 years of this, first of all, we are trying to get out of a internal armed conflict, and that's why we have a peace accord that was signed in 2016. This government has turned their back completely to that accord because it is not in its interest to follow up and implement the agreements in that accord. Some of them had to do with reforms, institutional reforms that we allowed to review some of the economic policies and some of the militarized policies of this that happen in this country. So we have had this situation, violent situation, when hundreds of social leaders are killed every day. This is a country that holds half of the attacks against social leaders in the world. From the global numbers, we hold 50% of those numbers. But this is also a country where 30% of the population is unemployed. This is a country with the quarter of the population is Black and is under severe economic depression. 80% of Black people in most areas is impoverished. We live from an informal economy. We are facing displacement. We are facing dispossession of lands. We are facing the killing of our leaders. People is just exhausted of these policies. People is exhausted of these repressive forms of attacking the population economically, socially. There is no health services. There are cities and there are towns that have no water, that have no access to education. So it's a combination of series of things. For us as Black people that have been pushing for this implementation of the peace accord and the ethnic chapter, it means also not only the attacks of our leaders, but it means also the have to be upfront defending territorial rights from these economic policies. we are now in front of a government that is decided to consolidate this monopoly of economy and govern by militarizing the country. So as we oppose all this, we are facing this civil repression, and people is really exhausted. 70% of the young people in this country is unemployed, had no health, no education, no access to any basic services, and that's why that people is on the street. I have to say, good number of that people is Black.
And clearly, while we're seeing some of the levels of repression that we are, Ajamu, obviously, feel free to add to anything that Charo has laid out. But I also want to ask you that sort of that standard question. Why is Black Alliance for Peace concerned about this, and why should Black people in the United States or elsewhere be concerned about what's happening in Colombia, and specifically the Black population there? What's up? Why should we? Go ahead.
Good question, and I think it's an important question that people need to raise, and we have the answer, and it's quite simple. One, we are part of collective humanity. We are an African people, and the people who are being impacted the most severely in Colombia, beyond the indigenous people, are in fact Afro-Colombians, African people. But our concern with Colombia is not just the fact that there are African people in Colombia, but we are anti-imperialists, and we are in fundamental solidarity with all who are in the struggle for national liberation, authentic national sovereignty against the axis of domination, the US, EU, NATO axis of domination. We also are opposed to, and this is the structural expression of the pan-European colonial capitalist white supremacist patriarchy that emerged beginning in 1492. So we're absolutely clear about who the enemy is and our responsibility. So we raise up Colombia because many people don't know that Colombia represents, in terms of the Black population, the third largest Black or African population outside of the African continent. You have Brazil #1, the US #2, and then Colombia. So this fight in Colombia on the part of Black people for self-determination, for independence, for life, is a fight that we are a part of, and we believe that it's important to use this moment to inform people about what is really happening on the ground in that country. Because we know people for the first time being exposed to Colombia, and we also can recognize too that just interesting, weird kind of phenomenon where in some ways the Black population and the Black reality is being erased from the dominant narrative. And that's why the work that Sister Charo and PCN are involved in is so critically important. And we in the Black Alliance for Peace are here to support and to help to amplify the voices of Charo and Black folks in this country in order to deal with their situation and to help people to understand the connection between their situation and ours in the U.S.
Go ahead, Charo. Let me unmute you. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Well, if I can add to your question and what Ajamu just said, I think it's important also to remind people in the United States and the African brothers and sisters there that Colombia is considered main ally of the United States in this region. And, Colombia has been serving to these imperialistic purposes of the United States in different places, like Haiti. And I think that Ajamu can talk a lot more about that. But we have police going to Haiti to instruct and support Haiti with the disappearances issues that Haiti is suffering. That I just mentioned that we have hundreds of people disappeared here in Colombia just from May 28 to today on this strike. And they are going to other countries to assist the police and military forces to resolve their problems when they are causing those problems here. And I have to remind people that it's with their taxes, with your taxes, that this police and this military here in this country is killing us. It's with your taxes that the United States have been supporting for 15 years now the policies of Plan Colombia, mostly focused on militarization, on training of militaries and police. Why this brutality is happening? If you compare images of how police attack here people and how police have been attacking Black people in the United States, you see the similarities, right? They are vicious. They are shooting us. Then in a peaceful demonstration, they don't bother with tear gas anymore. They shoot us. And where that comes from the trainings from the United States, from the money from the United States, and that comes from your pockets. So I think
I don't mean to interrupt, but can you say a little more about that? Because we hear, I hadn't thought about that. We hear a little bit, at least, about U.S. support for Israel, maybe a little bit about U.S. support for Egypt. But to what extent is the U.S. supporting directly the militarization? We hear certainly through the work of BAP and other formations, the militarization of the African continent through the support of the West and the United States. To what extent is the U.S. supporting? Can you say more about how the U.S. supports the militarization of Colombia and the police in particular?
Yes. Under the guise of these anti-terrorism and anti-drugs policies that the United States has, they have been giving money to Colombia since 2000. Well, obviously, they have been giving money in many different ways to this country for a really long time. But let's talk just about Plan Colombia, when from 2010, they have invested, and I put this in quotation marks because means investment for the imperialistic policies, not for people. And they have been investing over $15 billion in use this policy. And up to 2010, we could demonstrate that 80% of that money at that point was 10 billion, over 8 billion really. 80% of that money was all focused on training, on equipment, on presence of military bases here from the United States. Then they removed those bases and they removed some of the military per se presence, but the trainings have continued. We are constantly having here U.S. military forces training in different ways. They're also supporting this so-called war on drugs that now is calling back for aspersion of this chemical that is barred everywhere in the world, but in Colombia, with this the glyphosato. I don't know how to say in English. And all these trainings, constant trainings, they are arguing that are not just military, but it is intelligence, it is operations. All these trainings, the results of that is the high level of brutal repression that we are seeing today. You know, these forces are very, very, very well trained to the point that now they are going to other countries to support police and military forces in other countries. So that is what is going on. This money that come from the pockets of people in the United States that is giving equipment, giving training on military and operations and intelligence to this country. How Colombia paid back? Colombia paid back with putting, policies that benefit the multinationals, the policies that benefit for companies in the United States to take the biogenetic resources in our territories, policies that allow them to be supporting the militarization in other countries. And then, all these positions against Venezuela, for instance, Colombia allowed military presence last year in the borders around Venezuela when Trump said that Venezuela was a threat. So this is a country that is completely on its needs for the United States.
And if I could add to that, a very comprehensive response, just specifically the main police unit or force, national force that is used to suppress and repress opposition is called ASMOD. This is a unit that was created coming out of what Charo shared with your audience, Plan Colombia. And Plan Colombia was a plan that was put in place between Colombia and the U.S. to provide military support for they pretended it was for counter narcotics, but basically it was counterinsurgency. So ASMOD is the unit that was created to put down dissent, put down opposition. This is the unit that is responsible for much of the repression that we have seen in Cali and other places here in Colombia. So
in English, they say it's translated as Mobile Anti-Disturbance Squad.
Yes.
That's
yeah. And it's important to point out that the Master Biden is proud to proclaim his role in creating Plan Colombia. That individual who says Black Lives Matter. So these are some of the connections, and the fact that the U.S. has access to 8 bases here in Colombia, and as Charo pointed out, Colombia plays a very important role in advancing U.S. regional interests, including undermining Venezuela, but also undermining all of the progressive states and movements here in the region. So the connection is quite clear. And that's why it's so important, Jared, that for activists in the U.S., in particular Africans, to really struggle to transcend the kind of hegemonic U.S. centrism we have in the U.S., to revive the traditional Black internationalist perspective that's always been the centerpiece of our oppositional movements in that country, because we are in fact an African people, which means we are a global people, and we are at the center of the U.S. empire. So we have a responsibility to understand the connections between the U.S. and these various struggles and peoples globally, because we are strategically situated in a place where we can be of assistance once we become conscious and aware of our strategic location and our tasks and responsibilities.
Right on. Charo, I think if I understood correctly, you have to your time with us is a little short, but I did if I could, I have just one quick I want to invite you to say anything else you would want to say on your way, but and thank you very much again. But I am curious, I did have the pleasure and the fortune of marrying into a wonderful Panamanian family, your neighbors, but and former country people, as I sometimes like to tease a little bit, right? They used to be part of Colombia until the U.S. wanted to say, we need something else divided. Anyway, but I'm just curious, what role is if any is Panama playing in all of this? If I could just ask that. I mean, what is the relationship between those two countries? Anyway, could you say a word or two about that?
Well, effectively, Panama is is a sister country, but no, it's government. Panama has been very. Panama is pretty much like Colombia in terms of we serving U.S. Military and economic interest. And with the right-wing government we have right now, what we are seeing in the region is really mostly support to that than opposition. And as we share these limits with Panama, and those borders are significant population, indigenous and Afro-descendant population that cross borders and is suffering terribly from deprivation. Are some of the most poor communities in both sides of the countries. And what we have on those areas is also a very silent repression and economic and military repression, heavy presence of military in that area. And for us is a what's the word I want to use? As strategic as it is located, is an area that we need to be keeping a lot of attention to, because those are the focus, that we can see, like open frontiers for U.S. militarization at any point. Those are areas where, as Venezuela presents strong opposition and restraint, we don't see necessarily that Panama will do that in a moment where the United States wants to again impose its military presence and cross borders with Colombia.
Right on. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And is there? Again, I think if you had to run, but is there anything else you wanted to leave us with? Any actions you would like us to see us take? Is there any particular contact information you want to leave us with? Anything in particular?
Well, there's a lot. Fortunately, a lot on social media to find out. What is going on in general. We want really to call close attention to the situation of Black Afro-descendant people here in Colombia. We are going to hold a webinar this Wednesday with Black Alliance for Peace and Afro-Resistance and the Black Communities Process, PCN, which is my organization, this Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And I think that Ajamu can help me with the links and information about that. But that's a webinar where we want to discuss more about Afro-Colombian people and the situation in the context of this strike, but also in the context of the peace accord. I also want to tell people to keep really close attention to this situation. We are facing a state of emergency. This government is really pushing very, very hard for that. And that's the reason why some right-wing civilians yesterday were shooting the Maroon and the indigenous guards here in Cali. Is pushing to bring the military to completely hold the control of the country. So these kind of things have to be, people has to express a strong opposition and strong concerns about the possibility of this state of emergency, but also keep asking the questions and about what is going on with Black people in this country. Numbers don't tell the truth about the realities that we live here. It's important that we ask and find and help to put their voice out regarding these issues. We have a website, it's in Spanish, we don't have much in English in that website, and a Facebook page, which is Renacientes, and I'm going to write it down for you. So it's RENACIENTES, and I'm pretty sure you can spell it for me, for people to follow up. So just stay informed. BAP and our websites are posting constantly information. We want to keep these webinars and events open up for people to learn more about the situation here in Colombia with Black people. So, and demand from your representatives at Congress to be very strong regarding these policies in Colombia.
Right on. Well, Charo Mina Rojas, again, thank you very much for joining us. And anytime, please don't hesitate to let us know, and we'll happily have you back. There's obviously so much more to talk about, but best of luck to you. Appreciate your work, and take good care. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anytime. All right, good folks. So unfortunately, we're just stuck with me and Ajamu for a little bit. Brother, we had to try to hold it down, do the best we can.
It's gonna be hard.
I know it's gonna be hard. We keep, we anyway, we do the best we can. Can you say a few more words about this issue that Charo was talking about? In terms of Blackness in this case in Central America, the similarities and differences maybe for an audience here in the States. What are they? How, because a lot of times we hear that countries in Latin America, will say, well, we don't have Black populations. We're just Colombians or Panamanians or Cubans or Venezuelans. When she's talking about an Afro population, a Black population, what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good and important question. That notion of the sort of merging of all people into a new race of people in Latin America, this notion of racial democracy, which was always a myth, it no longer has the same kind of currency it had a few years ago, because people have recognized the reality of the fact that you have very distinct peoples in this region. You have the indigenous, of course, you have the Africans in various countries who have politically asserted themselves and demanded recognition and demanded that their rights as collectives were recognized and in fact protected. And so in Colombia, you have a very similar kind of movement. In fact, some would argue that you have one of the most sophisticated movements in the Americas, including North America, taking place right here in Colombia, to the extent that the Afro-Colombians have forced the Colombian state, despite all of its backwardness, forced them to recognize Black people in Colombia as, in fact, a people, which is profoundly different than, for example, what we have in the U.S., where the legal regime in the U.S. only recognizes us as individuals. And while people refer to Black people as sort of racialized terms, we have no legal collective standing. You have some discrimination laws that allow for you to make a claim of racial discrimination based on your membership in a so-called race. But what we have in the U.S., and this is a whole nother thing we can't go into in these last few minutes, but what we have in the U.S. is a marvelous and interesting kind of consequence of the counterinsurgency that emerged in the 1970s, and that is in the U.S., and that is the retention of race without ethnicity. meaning that Black people still remain and are racialized as a race, but the ethnic component of our people, and as we all know, the ethnicity issue is the cultural component, the thing that makes you, in fact, a people. In terms of the ethnic Africanness of our people, that was the target in my argument, my observation, my analysis. That, in fact, was the target of the U.S. state, to basically transform the African into a quote unquote American. So we have race without peoplehood in the U.S. So in Colombia, they don't have that issue because of the particularities of Colombia, because of the fact you have Black African communities in Colombia that have been relatively politically and culturally isolated for literally hundreds of years. There's a strong understanding of who they are. And that was the basis of political struggle here in this country. Now, unfortunately, as Charo referred, the armed conflict in this country has impacted those Black territories, communities where, we work in communities that were established at like 1609 and 1636, but as the conflict expanded, they expanded into those isolated territories over the last 20 years, 25 years or so. And many people ended up having to flee because the paramilitaries, working in conjunction with the corporations and supported by the Colombian state, were moving into those territories to do what? To take the land of these Africans and these indigenous people, because these people reside on some of the most rich and biodiverse territories on the planet. Okay, so that's been the terms of the struggle, and as a consequence of massive displacement, and Colombia has one of the biggest displaced populations on the planet. Many of these people ended up in Bogota, in Cali, and as Charo talked about, in the communities where ESMAD was concentrating its repressive efforts. So people were displaced from the territories, ended up in places like Cali, and now being subjected to a massive repression from the state. So, these are the terms of the struggle in this country, and the struggle for maintaining one's integrity as a Black population. So that's what's happening in Colombia. It's happening other places, of course. I think your audience is aware of the massacre that took place in Brazil a few days ago, where the Brazilian authorities went into one of the favelas. Basically, it was a death squad. They had a list of people that they were targeting, and they went in and they basically assassinated these folks. Okay. And we talk about what's happening in the U.S. in terms of the brutality and the killings of Black folks by the police. And it's important to raise those issues, to confront the state on these issues. And we don't want to get into oppressive Olympics, but the fact of the matter is, Jared, when you look at Brazil, for example, they are killing thousands of Africans every year, okay, the police forces. So we say, again, if you want to understand what it is we're up against, if you want to be liberated, you have to understand that we are fighting a global system. You're not getting liberated in the U.S. as long as the U.S. settler colonial state remains in place and the colonial capitalist project, okay? You have to understand the connection between our colonization in the U.S. and the struggles of other colonized people who are being colonized and oppressed and exploited by the same source. So internationalism is not some kind of esoteric, some kind of hip thing that you embrace. It is an absolute necessity, okay? So understand the terms of this struggle. You ain't getting free by yourself, but you can push that line in the U.S. because people really ain't about anything but reformism. And we say you can't reform your way out of this thing because the contradictions are only going to get sharper because the neoliberal capitalist order can't do anything else but rely on force and violence because they have no program for you. the contradictions of this moribund system is going to continue to sharpen. Okay, so understand what we up against and what we got to do. So this is the issue in Colombia in terms of fighting for.
No, and I appreciate what you laid out there, because it's not about oppression Olympics. I think you're right to point out that as bad as it is for us here, the fact that we live in the sort of colonial metropole makes there is a difference. I don't have to use terms like better or worse, but there are differences. And I mean, maybe could you say another word about that? Because I felt I don't know how to describe it other than to say there's a feeling, since fortunately I haven't suffered any of these the worst of any of this. But when I leave this country, it's hard to say. I know this sounds crazy, but as bad as it is here, as terrifying as it can be here, there's just a different feeling, a greater sense of unfreedom, of unsafety in other parts of the world. And it's not simply about having an American passport when I travel. It's about a recognition that, I don't know, there's something different. The repression it plays out differently. Maybe it's a little less and I hope I'm not freezing up here, but the sophisticated veneer that we see here disappears.
I hear you. I know where you're going with that, Jared. And you're right. It's raw and in your face and obvious, in the so-called global South. But interesting enough, Jared, as raw and dangerous as it is, even in a place like Colombia, where we have to have security and everything else. And, I know Charo doesn't get into this kind of stuff that often, but even PCN, I think that a year and a half ago, the leadership was meeting not too far from here, and they got attacked one Saturday morning by armed individuals with grenades and automatic weapons. Okay, they tried to take out the whole leadership. Okay, fortunately, though, security measures were in place, and what could have been a massacre ended up being a firefight. And so no one died that day, even though 2 people got shot. So, but saying all that, Jared, I feel more threatened in the U.S. than I do here.
I don't know why I'm laughing at that. I don't know why I'm laughing at that.
It's because I feel more threatened in the U.S. than I do here, partly for various reasons. But yeah, it's raw and all that. But there's fight back, there's organization, and there's obvious means of protection that some people have. And so yeah, it's a difference. I even say this too. As grinding as the poverty here is in the global South, psychologically and spiritually, I say it's worse to be poor in the U.S. than it is
absolutely
here.
Absolutely.
The people here understand the contradiction. They understand it ain't about them, it's about the structure. But in the U.S., they have been able to transform consciousness. People blame themselves because, hey, you in the U.S., everybody can make it.
You're absolutely right.
And it saps your dignity. Okay, even though you pretend like you're a fighter, but you have those doubts, and maybe something wrong with me, so you don't see that here. People understand, and that's why they fight. That's why you have a different kind of civic culture here. You can't just be in a community and be isolated. You got to be. When my son came down here and he went back, he said, Dad, I never realized how isolated we are. I don't see the neighbors. I don't see anybody. You can't live like that here. As you know how it is in Panama. Everybody's out. They out in the street. You walk down the street and people engage in something called conversation.
Yeah. And if they don't see you for a while, they show up at your door and
look, what's up?
What's up?
Yeah. Right. And they drop in like it used to be in the old days here.
Yeah.
They drop in when it's time to eat and stuff.
Absolutely. And when they hear you're in town, everybody just floods on over. There's no I'll be there or can I come through. It's just everybody's there. No, I hear you, man. And I think, you know, I don't know, it's been some years, but there was I don't know who does these polls, but at some point there was, well, at least in Panama, they were saying that we were voted the happiest people in the world or whatever it is. And not, again, it's not to glorify or romanticize, but it is to point out, I think, the subtle difference that you're talking to here is that the poverty is explained differently, is interpreted differently, I guess, to your point. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, so it's a reality, Jared. And I wanted to just real quickly, because I know we going up on time, to point out one other thing about the whole Colombia situation that we find very interesting. And we're very happy that people are becoming aware of Colombia, and happy that it penetrated the bourgeois media, and people organizing solidarity events in Paris and London and all kind of places, okay? But we asked a very simple question, Jared. Is this attention on Colombia, is this as a consequence of the massive numbers of people who came into the streets? And we raised that question because we've been doing work on, for example, Haiti. And we asked the question, why is it that there's more attention on Colombia and more solidarity on Colombia than it was with Haiti? Is it because there's been more repression from the state in Colombia versus Haiti? And we say no. What is it that can be explained that all the progressives and radicals in the US and Europe, they come out and Colombia, but we couldn't get them to make a move and to say anything on Haiti? What is the difference?
The same difference. Yeah, the difference between why people will champion Julian Assange and say nothing about Mumia. It's a similar difference in there. Well, but that's why we appreciate Black Alliance for Peace. And in the last few minutes, if you would just, maybe say another word about what BAP is up to and how, why people need to be in touch and a part of it, and maybe any concluding, thoughts on this conversation, but point well made regarding Haiti and Colombia.
Yeah. And that's one reason why the Black Alliance for Peace, we are in fact strengthening our ties into so-called Latin America. And as Charo mentioned, there's going to be that webinar on Wednesday at 7:30. Look out for that information to get registered. This will be highlighting the voices of Black Colombians. But on May 22nd, we're organizing another webinar on the Americas, and we're highlighting and raising up Haiti, because we have a permanent committee now. So we are working through Haiti into the Americas. So Haiti, Colombia, Brazil, and we're connecting that to Venezuela. People don't know about in terms of the core of support in Venezuela and the Bolivarian revolutionary process being Black Venezuelans, okay? So we're raising up, in the context of African liberation, these Black populations in the Americas and the Americas as a whole. And we say that while Africa is primary, we've got to raise up the African nation, and the African nation extends beyond the African continent. So May 22nd, be looking out for that webinar to be a part of that. We're not just educating people, as important as that is. We want people to join organization. So we are expanding our work. We're expanding the Haiti Americas committee, and we'll be expanding and developing structures of solidarity for those countries, Brazil and Colombia, working with our member organizations like Afro Resistance. So we are still about building organization. Right now, we developed a web page on Colombia as of this morning, so people can go there. We're going to start populating that with more information. So if you want to get more information on Colombia, in particular on Black folks in Colombia, go to blackallianceforpeace.com and get that information, and be looking out for all the other work that we're involved in. We're still dealing with issues like Afghanistan, Jared, and we're still raising up what is happening with the U.S. on the African continent. We got so many things we got to deal with because our people got to be educated and understand the terms of this struggle.
Right on. Thank you again, Ajamu Baraka. Shout out again to Charo Mina Rojas. Appreciate you. BlackAllianceForPeace.com, and we'll see you out there in the whirlwind, my man. Thanks again. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jared.
Anytime. Take good care. All right, good people. So a lot more to come up here. Again, out of Mix What I Like Live here at Black Power Media. We're going to take a quick break, but as a shout out to not only our conversation, but also specifically to Afro Native World, who brought up my favorite province, Darien. I want to take this quick break before we come back with Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, and then in another hour or so with DaveyD. But I want to take this quick pause by showing you a video. My brother-in-law, Ideal Bayano, brilliant MC, this great video, Dale Dale, shot in Yavisa in Darien provinces. You might even see a cameo from your boy, your main man, Jab, J-A-B. And no, it's like I'm just playing. But anyway, check this out. We'll be right back in just a minute with much more here at I Mix What I Like Live in Black Power Media. Dhoruba Bin-Wahad is already in the building. We'll take a quick break. Dale Dale, my man Ideal Bayano, and come right back with much more. Let me get this off the screen. Let me get nope, not that, but that. And then let's rock this real quick, and I'll be back in a quick second.
Dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante. Dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante. They call me Bayano. I come from where they got quicksand instead of potholes. Straight pedals and gatos. Bathing in the river with the potholes. My grandmama played the lotto every Friday in Zapato. Only way you make it at soccer or if you got flow. And drugs too, yeah, they had plugs too. We was in the barrio, we ain't had no dungaroos. Bangles and chicha. Every OG alcoholic, but somehow I'm a preacher. Big hips, brown skin, each mamacita. The east side forest where they grow that cocaine. Retired kingpins, they posing like they preachers. Ay Dios mío, you heard about my primo, I ain't tell you about my tío. Kicking the door like dámelo mío. Dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante. Dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante. My Leo old school, so he fight with his hands. But he got the right weapon, read by his nightstand. Call up his right hand, gun in his white pants, light a cigar, bury a nigga in white sand. Over in La Playa, yeah, where they least suspected. Where you'll see the vultures fly to eat the scraps for breakfast. Where the culture will provide a sweet ass selection. With a strong body of women, they breed adolescents. 3 Smith & Wessons hidden in the alleyway. You'll shit your pants if you walk where my daddy stayed. On the canoes to get food. Now his Saturday is right around and his caddy day. Mama said only play right here. Where the gangster filmmakers come to get ideas. Where everybody in the struggle get along. And the police harass you if you mention in this song. Me that. dale, dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante. Dale, dale, como te enseñé, mami. Dale, dale, como me enseñaste. Suave, suave, juega vivo el besillo. Suave, suave, que viene lo maleante.
Tomaleante, 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 tomaleante.
Recogerlo.
Tomaleante, 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 tomaleante.
Recogerlo.
Tomaleante, 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 tomaleante.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Welcome back to our Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball, Black Power Media. That's my main man, my brother-in-law, Ideal Bayano. Hope you enjoyed Dale Dale. That joint was woo. It was, the joint is fire, and it was hot like fire out there. I mean, you are right there on the equator and you feel the sun on your neck, but it was beautiful. African, indigenous populations. It was dope, man. One of the best summers of my life just a couple years ago. Anyway, and Ideal Bayano, King Bayano, Maroon, Panamanian, African in Panama, what we now call Panama, leading Maroon revolutions. Absolutely. So anyway, good times, good times. Speaking of Maroons and revolutions, we're going to keep it moving here with my main man, ours. Again, I keep saying, you know, Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, longtime political prisoner, member of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, New York 21. Among, if not my favorite, you know, still living philosopher and political analyst. And always happy to have him. He contacted the other day and said, can we get him on? He said, absolutely. So here we go. Brother Dhoruba, welcome back, my man. It's good to see you. Uh-oh, I don't hear you though. Hold on, there we go. Let me unmute you. You got to unmute yourself. Yeah, you're muted. I can't even unmute you. There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. Good to see you. Good to hear you.
Yeah, man. I was listening to Ajamu just a little while ago. Mm-hmm. And yeah, man, he's 100% on the money, especially about the paradigm of domestic colonialism that we're experiencing. A lot of people don't want to look at the evolution of chattel slavery in America to second-class citizenship, the fake second-class citizenship, when in fact we're living in a capitalist in the metropoles finance capitalism, and we're a domestic colony essentially. And I think what Ajamu was pointing out was removing the ethnicity from race has not caused us to consider independent political power. That's why we're always talking about reform and never about abolition. That's why we're always discussing the issue within the context of the mainstream politics and the institutions of capitalism. And so, yeah, I mean, Ajamu was right on the money. And I just wanted to add, too, I was in Venezuela a while back with Mama C, who lives in Tanzania. And we were invited there by the government to deal with a whole different perspective, a third world perspective, a southern hemispheric perspective on climate change and globalization and how we should deal with our environment. So,
and I'm assuming by Mama C, and I don't suppose you got your headset with you in reach, do you?
And please, I beg you. I know you're getting a lot of ambient noise.
And yeah. Okay, but real quick, I'm assuming by Mama C you meant Mama Charlotte O'Neill.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, shout out to her and Baba Pete. Again, I had the privilege some years ago to pass through their compound out there in Tanzania, and remain inspired by that joint. Anyway.
Oh yeah, Mama C and Comrade O'Neill, man, they something, man. They're pioneers in a lot of ways because the type of Pan-African solidarity that resulted in them landing in Tanzania. You know, O'Neill was in the international section along with Sekou Odinga and other comrades when Eldridge Cleaver was heading that section in Algeria. And so, you know, when that whole thing kind of like broke up, comrades, in fact, there's still 2 comrades in France who were granted asylum on the quiet side after 10 years residency. And then there was the former field marshal of the Black Panther Party, Donald Cox, DC, who died in exile in France. And O'Neill, you know, he went to Tanzania. Setawayo was one of the Panther 21, died in I believe it wasn't Tanzania. I believe it was Kenya. No, Zambia. So I'm saying that what the brother Ajamu was talking about, how we have to understand that the liberation that we're talking about is not going to occur outside of the paradigm, outside of the struggle to overthrow the paradigm of finance capitalism. Right. And I think finance capitalism is in a unique contradiction right now because the global economy, because of the environment, because of a host of other things, and nation states are turning away from fossil fuels, and the whole finance capitalist system from industrialization to the present has been based on fossil fuel. So this transition has provided us with a unique opportunity to assert ourselves and to assert our ethnicity in a whole new way. It's a miracle that right now that we still aren't talking about a Black political party, a third political party, a revolutionary political party. I mean, this is very, very troubling. We should be talking about this, especially given how things are developing in this country now with the rise of the right and white supremacy taking the hood off and just nakedly parading through the state capitals, trying to deal with the rise and the change of the ethnicity of America. I mean, it's very troubling that we keep revisiting this right to vote, the access to the polls over and over and over and over again. After we win it after emancipation, then the 54 Brown first Board of Education, and then the Voting Rights Act, and now we how many times do we have to be locked on stupid, you see, and repeat the same mistakes, rethink and repeat failure? And I think Ajamu was brilliant in assessing the value of the African family in South America, which is neglected, very neglected, and has a great revolutionary potential, especially in alliance with the native indigenous populations. And so, yeah, I was really felt good. I managed to get here early and listen.
No, that's great, and I appreciate. Let me just mute you while I raise this next question for you. But ever since I read, Blood in My Eye, I don't know, 20, however many years ago, and George made the call then that we, that we need an alternative underground press that would popularize the idea of revolution. We need a secret army. I admittedly. That's not me. I'm not, the press part but the third part was the alternative political party that would again sort of be the above ground organizing, that part. I was like, so why aren't we? I agree with you. Like, and I support it. So we got Ujima People's Progress Party. I've been advocating, this after party formation, just this idea of moving people off the democratic, electoral plantation. But if I can, I just want I happily ask you to comment on any more about that or what Ajamu was talking about. But I did want to just quickly to just have, if I could, just as a segue to what you what sort of prompted this particular conversation, was that you sent me this story the other day from last week, where House Democrat introduces bill to release COINTELPRO files on surveillance of Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. Talking.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Hello? Can you hear me?
I don't know what to say, everybody. I apologize. I have no idea what happened. My internet just went completely out.
I know what happened. I went, as soon as you said, let me show you something, the thing with about the introduction to COINTELPRO is when I went offline.
No, it was my end, though.
It was your error?
My end was watching it happen here. Yeah, it was something happening. My entire internet connection just dropped off.
Yeah, because I went to my hotspot. I just changed off to my hotspot and got off the hotel.
Yeah, no, that shouldn't be impacting me. And everything. I don't know what happens here. I keep everything over here is supercharged and set up and working perfectly. Often until I go live, and sometimes end up talking to Dhoruba. So now I don't know if we've lost him.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, but I honestly am not sure what is going on or how this I don't know. Anyway, and then on top of that, I set for I prioritize the device. I got all my stuff supercharged. I don't know what's going on. I can't anyway. The feds, yeah, Craig. So listen. Anyway, let me just try to reset the segue. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Do you hear me? I don't think he is hearing me.
Are we tuned in? Are we back together again?
Yeah, I think so. Although I'm lagging now again too, so I don't know if you can hear me. I hear you. Do you hear me?
I can hear you clear. I hear you clearly.
All right. I see my internet. The connection here, even where my internet is strong, somehow the connection here keeps dropping. But the parallel or the segue I was trying to quickly draw from this conversation of what you were saying, what George Jackson has said, and others about an alternative political party, is that you contacted me initially about this story from May 4th, where Congressman Bobby Rush, former member of the Black Panther Party with Fred Hampton in Chicago, and a longtime Democratic Party congressman, was now or is now interested in having the government releases COINTELPRO document on the surveillance of Black Panthers, including Fred Hampton. And it reminded me of the failure of the Democratic Party and the failure of our engagement with the Democratic Party as sort of represented in the last several decades of work with Bobby Rush. And now all of a sudden he wants to, I don't know what you think is his motivation here, but now all of a sudden he seemed, after all these decades, to be interested in surveillance and COINTELPRO. what drew your attention to this story, and how do you interpret it, and how would you encourage that we interpret it?
Well, Bobby Rush is a punk. He's a coward. And, I have over 50,000 pages of COINTELPRO files. It was the COINTELPRO files that got my conviction overturned. And my COINTELPRO file, I first got wind of files in my actual name and surveillance from Fred Hampton's suit, from Fred Hampton's case. He was suing the Chicago Police Department. This was after his death, and one of the lawyers in that process came across documents in my name, COINTELPRO documents with my name on it. I was on the Agitator Index. I was in the Black Nationalist photo album. I was on another one. They had another index. I forgot what the name of it is. Extremist file, Black Extremist Index. And he sent copies of that particular document to my lawyers. And I was at that time in front of Mary Johnson Lowe, who was the first Black appointee to the Supreme Court, to the Southern District Court by LBJ. And she had my suit in front of her. And the federal government was representing that I had no such COINTELPRO files, that they knew nothing about this. I was just a common criminal, and all of that stuff. So it shocked her that the federal government would lie to her like that. And so she got furious and demanded that they turn over everything that they had on the Black Panther Party, on me, the New York chapter, and everything. And I spent 2 years in MCC going over files and discovered that the government complicity in falsely convicting me, and that's how I got my case overturned. But having said all of that, one of the things that I did when I first came out was to go visit Bobby Rush, along with Olombe Brath, a renowned known Pan-African elder. We went to Bobby Rush and said that I had all these documents that indicated how the counterintelligence program has focused on over 70% of its energy on the Black Panther Party and the so-called New Left, and how it undermined Black leadership in the Black community on a very fundamental level, how it suborned perjury and persecution and imprisonment of Panthers on the local level. Because if just for your listeners' information, the Church Committee, which had hearings on the counterintelligence program, stopped their hearings and ceased their hearings when it came to releasing information on the FBI's collusion with local law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies. So Church Committee never went into that. The relationship between the police and local police, state police, and the FBI. We subsequently learned through the counterintelligence files that I got that the FBI abandoned COINTELPRO as an acronym and adapted a new acronym called NUKIL, the new killing of police officers. And it was an anti-urban guerrilla program. It was aimed at the Black Underground, at the Puerto Rican Liberation Movement, at the Weather Underground, and it involved the active pursuit and extermination of Black activists and leftists in America. And this was an urban guerrilla, anti-urban guerrilla program, anti-urban insurgency program that people know little about. But getting to Bobby Rush, when I went to Bobby Rush and said, we had these files, you are in the Congressional Black Caucus. I believe he was assistant chairman of some big person on the Congressional Black Caucus. I said, the Congressional Black Caucus should, demand to have hearings on the counterintelligence program and its involvement in the African American community and how they have undermined the careers of certain Black political leaders, how they've assassinated activists, how they were involved with various nefarious operations to undermine the Black Power movement. And he told me straightforward that he had too much on his plate. He was too busy. And this was in 1991, I believe. And he did nothing ever since. And he seldom alludes to his relationship with the Black Panther Party. And people need to understand why. It's for the same reason that Dr. Martin Luther King's cohorts and confidants abandoned the Poor People's Campaign when King was killed. They went into straight politics. They became the Cummings and the bootlickers on Washington in Congress. They became the major advocates of the drug war in the Congressional Black Caucus. We seem to forget that many of the people that we think in the Congressional Black Caucus, of going even up to Maxine Waters and all of them, that they have somehow been on the cutting edge of progressive legislation in America. That's nothing, it's furthest from the truth. The Congressional Black Caucus has always been used as a stopgap for Black folks forming their own or developing their own political power. And so we need to really understand that when we went, Alombe Brath and I went to Bobby Rush to ask him to bring this in front of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he told us he was too busy to deal with that. We should understand what that means. Bobby Rush was scared straight by Fred's assassination, because he was next in line in terms of leadership in the Chicago chapter. It's the same thing with Dr. King when he was murdered in Memphis. All of those around him were scared straight and became the advocates in Operation Push to get Black people in corporate America, became the bootlickers that we see now in Congress. We're talking about good trouble. You know,
but
so,
Ruba, couldn't we say that or wouldn't, or I'm sure some would say, and wouldn't, maybe you would even say, or shouldn't you say that the impact, the positive impact of the Judas and the Black Messiah film has been to reconnect Bobby with his radical roots and his interest in exposing the ravages of New Kill and COINTELPRO? Maybe this is him seeing the light in the aftermath of the movie, and we could say that this is a positive outcome of the film.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say he's an opportunist, and he was always an opportunist. And I would say the reason why he's doing this now is because it enhances and burnishes his political career, which is almost at an end. But I think that we need to understand what leadership by victimhood and rewriting history by reinventing failure. That's what Bobby Rush is about. So when we look at Bobby Rush and we see what that really means, it's encapsulation. It's a diversion, just like Judas and the Black Messiah was a revision of the radical history of not just the Black Panther Party, but radical history in general. It was a misdirection. And I think Bobby Rush is involved in another misdirection with the counterintelligence files. Because who is he going to call as the foremost expert on these files? Who would he call to be the consular, the lawyer or the counsel for the Black Congressional Caucus if they were to release all of these files?
Crump.
Who would he call? Huh?
Crump.
You gonna call Crump? Crump hasn't won a case since he got a law degree.
Hey, he got the Floyd family $27 million.
It's different. It's different getting money from the state than when they know they caught all the way out there and actually winning the case in court that puts the politics of the issue on in perspective. Let me be clear here. We need to understand that America, the United States, is a corporate garrison state. And it will not abolish the police, it will not reform the police, and it will not defund the armed agents of the state. It's not going to do that. And so we have to figure out what strategic vision and what vision that we do have as an encapsulated minority, or soon to be majority of population in the US. What does community control of policing really mean? What does decentralization of policing really mean? And we need to understand what the survival in America in this situation with the rise of white supremacy and state fascism, what does that really mean? How do we protect ourselves? How do we defend our communities from the aggressions of racist police and racist vigilantes? So these questions cannot be answered by a Bobby Rush late to the game releasing COINTELPRO papers. You see, all it does is gives him the opportunity and revisionists, and we'll have some academic experts, I'm sure, come out the Black Studies Department and claim to be experts on COINTELPRO, and this is what the Panthers did, and this is what the Panthers didn't do, and this is how we raised money. I even heard one professor said that the Black Panther Party primary source of funds was selling books and their publications and writings. And you tell that to all the kids and the young folks who was in the streets every day with a quota selling 250 newspapers every day at 50 cents each. You understand? You tell that to me, who had to go to the airport and fight to get the papers rerouted back to New York from Chip and Switch, Georgia somewhere. You see, because they were sabotaging our paper distribution. We need to understand what's taking place here. Who is the foremost expert on these COINTELPRO papers in the United States right now? Is there some academic in the Black Studies Department who read the files? I mean, I got the people that directed the movie The 13th. They want my papers. They want to send
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Are they? Wait. Is that Ava DuVernay's people? They're in touch with you now?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and my foremost concern is that those papers be made public to the people so that they could research our history, so that we could understand what went wrong, what went right, you know. And like I said, who is going to be the person that provides the direction and evaluation when these COINTELPRO papers are presented and we have hearings and all of this? Who?
So where are you going to? So where are you going to put those papers? Where are you going to put them?
Right now, they're going to one of the young brothers that came up under me and the campaign to free Black political prisoners and prisoners of war. He lives in New Jersey. He's a high school teacher. He's a very influential high school teacher in the sense that he's educated at least a generation and a half of young people, you know, into who they are and have motivated them to become better African human beings and adults. And so he's got a storage place for them, but that's just temporary. We have to get them digitalized. We have to get them reduce the digitalization, and the foremost expert on these papers is Robert J. Boyle.
I was just gonna say, I was just about to ask you, is Bobby Rush gonna call Bob Boyle?
Hell no. Hell no. He's probably gonna call Al Sharpton. He's probably gonna call Maulana Ron Karanga or somebody like that. You know, he's probably gonna call. You know, I mean. Hey!
Just real quick, I made the mistake of referring to Brother Karanga as Maulana in front of Marimba Ani one day, and thought I was gonna get my neck snatched off. I thought I was gonna get my head snatched off.
You just ought to. I hope nobody heard me use it. We don't say Maulana, we say Mama Lama. That's what we used to say, Mama Lama Ron Karanga.
But look. Let me just say while I'm here publicly that if I want to volunteer for the digitizing team. If you need,
you do?
Absolutely. Hell yeah, cool. Dhoruba, are you serious?
Oh, cool. That's good, man. That's
Yeah,
good. You
put me on the
know,
team, man. I'm serious.
I'm,
We need
you got Bob's number, and the brother that you got to get in touch with is Kenyatta.
all
Because
right, I'll get him.
Kenyatta, yeah,
I'll reach out.
yeah, get in touch with Kenyatta, and
Kenyatta, brother
yeah.
Kenyatta, if you watching, sometimes you check in. If you watching, I'll be reaching out.
Kenyatta's
shortly.
at the airport. He's here. Kenyatta's at the airport coming back. He's coming back. He's
Well,
coming back to the U.S.
When he gets home, he'll have an email from me.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. We're in the process of trying to do that now. We're getting them the files appraised, you know. And I meant to let me mention this. I'm giving myself a shout out here. You know, I have I told you about this this book that's coming out in Europe. It's printed. It's being distributed now. It's Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, Political Writings, and it's in German and French. It's translated to German and French and English, and all three languages are in the same text.
But where do we get our copies?
Yours is in the mid. That's why I called you and told you send me the app.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, right on. Yeah. I didn't know what it was for.
That's what it's for. It's 400 pages, and it's a bouillabaisse of comments that I've made over the years on various issues. You know,
thank you for doing it, and whoever hooked it up. Thank you all for doing it, because I've been arguing with you or suggesting to you for years that this be done. So please, this is very good news.
Well, the thing is that, you know, I have a lot of there's publishers that, you know, in the States that are reluctant, unless they leftist publications like the ones that did Passing It On. Mm-hmm. Not Passing It On.
Why is that?
Look
for me in the whirlwind.
Yeah. And the other one that I did on violence with Asada. You know, other than those, you know, those types of presses, you know, they shy away from anything that I write or any analysis that I have, you know, and so it's very difficult getting any type of book deal because, I mean, if you look at George Jackson's writings, mm-hmm. and you look at his analysis, and you look at what happened at the time that George was alive, and you'll see that the time and place and where he was in prison was lent itself to a book deal. And he got a book deal. Unfortunately, it got hijacked by some folks there in Oakland, California, who we know very well, and so we the folks here are reluctant to publish anything I write, and all of my writings come from abroad. I've written in Turkish, English publications. I even wrote essays for Kahan International, a publication out of Tehran. I've written in publications out of East Africa, out of Turkey and Germany, France, but none of my stuff has been published or printed in the United States.
Yeah, I see people talking about Still Black, Still Strong, which was an incredible, incredible. And in fact, this is how bad. I remember one day in upstate New York, I had to go to the DMV and was stuck in there so long. I read damn near the entire book waiting in the DMV and have never been so happy to be stuck in the DMV because I killed that. I ran through that book and was like, just thinking of the contradictions of reading that book while being angered in a state institutional office space. I was like, damn, they don't want me to read this today. But anyway, yeah, so people should definitely, if you have not gotten that book, Still Black, Still Strong, got Dhoruba, Asada, Mumia in it. I mean, it is woof. So I'm very glad to hear about this, and we will definitely look forward to talking with you more about the book and reading it and getting more people involved with it as much as we can. And as I said, and others have pointed out, I appreciate the suggestion that those papers get put on I Mix What I Like, but I agree with those who have said that your COINTELPRO papers, once once I and others help you digitize them, deserve their own website, and should get, you know, some sort of, you know, however you want it, but what's the word I'm looking for? Some center stage presentation of you know, whatever. So
Well, you know, you know that we sat down with Killer Mike and what was his name?
T.I.
and Ludacris, and you know, we tried to get them to, and this, you know, this was a while back, about 6 months maybe, right? More. Because I know I was stuck in the U.S. and I had canceled my flight just for this meeting, and I got stuck. You know, my flight back to Africa. But I thought it was important, and we had penned an open letter to them because we felt that that those individuals who have been pimping the pleasure principle and macking black culture to white folks, you know, that you know, they should see that they had a role to play right now, albeit, you know, not of their political intent, but they had a role to play right now in helping black people to understand that we had to do more than just, you know, relate to symbols and fashion, and then claim that that's in the behest of revolution, you know, of abolition, you know. And I thought they was going to respond positively, but you know, it was the old flim flam, you know, that this younger generation of activists tend to engage in, you know. And but again, you know, like I told you in the email, you know, back and forth we had in the little text where I said, well, now we see the consequences of hashtag movements and leadership by victimhood, and movements that are led by victimhood. That brings the Crumps to the fore, the Sharptons to the fore, you know, and we have people who are thrust into the whirlwind by a tragedy in their family, are telling movements how we should proceed in terms of opposing the criminal injustice system, or the state, or the armed agents of the state. You see, and it's sad. There has never been a movement in history that has liberated the people that were led by its victims. Once you become conscious of your oppression, of your exploitation, and you take up the necessary actions to alleviate it, you're no longer a victim. You see. And I think Frantz Fanon showed that clearly when he talked about the psychology of the native and what happens when the native actually kills the colonial, you know, and how easy it is for us to kill each other, you know, over someone stepping on our shoes or giving us a hard look. But when Popo show up on the scene, we throw our guns under the car, and you know, we surrender. You see, so that's I think what the value of these young people who are basically illegitimate capitalists, but they found a legitimate way of monkey hustling with culture. I think that they need to understand that their wealth is, what's the word, ephemeral? It's like that their wealth, and you proved it in your book on the myth of black buying power, you know. And I wrote a long time ago in Beggars on Horseback, the fiat currency, paper currency, is worthless. Is
that essay going to be in this book?
It might. But do you know what? Oh, you just raised a serious question. I think it is. But the problem with that is I wanted to do an appendix, an addendum. I wanted to put in the effects of technology and the weaponization of data and information. I had wanted to put, and it's not in there. So they might have printed the original draft because they had it for a while. you know.
Well, if you don't mind, I think that's an interesting point. I would love to hear you summarize, if you got a minute now to do it, to summarize your point about what you intended to add to that. Because I remember reading that we published it years ago. Happily read it. I would love to hear what you have to say about the weaponization of data. And what you would have liked to have added to that essay, or did added, that might not end up in this collection.
Well, Beggars on Horseback really goes to the essence of fiat currency and finance capital. It deals with the evolution of that, of what we consider the dollar and the pound and all of that. And as you know, it all comes out of the mercantilism that followed the expansion of Europe into the West, and followed the colonization and everything like that. But gold was always the universal criteria, the universal norm, and it was used to finance armies. It was used to take territory. Gold was always something that could be counted on, but you could always print money. And we know that the fiat currency, at least in the West, began when the British were exhausted in a war against I believe it was France. They were exhausted by this war, and they went to the banks, or they went to the money lenders, and they got a loan, and they used the fiat currency, as an IOU, and the rest is history. So what I was going to say is it was a capitalism, a mercantile capitalism in its early stages, from which the Industrial Revolution evolved, and came out. But we have a technological revolution that began with the globalization of information, with the instant communications of information, and I think that this phenomena really began to take effect after World War II. I mean, I think it was between wars, because we know we have a lot of photos and images of both world wars. And at that time, it was, that type of stuff was new. The photography and all of that type of stuff was new. Now we have generations that have never seen a payphone. Has never, they take a cell phone for granted. I mean, I go into lobbies, man, and 3-year-old kids are sitting there playing on their iPhone or on a touchpad. You see, and so this revolution in communications has made nationalism questionable. And that was going to be my major point. Is nationalism really progressive or revolutionary in the 21st century?
I mean, that's how I always understood Huey's intercommunalism. I mean, he made a similar point about the ability for Western media to transcend borders, making nationalism. And he said there is no nation to which we can decolonize at this point. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Well, Huey, has his place in history, and Huey was I would say a genius in many respects. And I'm not trying to go past any flaws that he may have. We all do. But his place in the radical pantheon of activists in America is straight. You can't take that piece of history that he stepped inside from him. For whatever reasons you want to use, your intersectional bullshit or whatever, you can't take it from him. So having said that, I was trying to say that in Beggars on Horseback, the major theme is creating a Pan-African paradigm in the 21st century.
Right.
It's basically saying that the nation states of Africa are artificial nation states. They're bogus nation states. They were created by the consequences of colonialism and imperialism. And in fact, African history has always been what I call a footnote to European history. It has always operated, always was taught in that sense, and so with the with the advent of technology, moving away from just industrial control of the means of production. Now we're talking about control of information, control of data. We're talking about instant communications means that perception can be made into reality. And we see that the hashtag movements. We see that we have internet gangsters, we have internet militants, we have internet revolutionaries, we have internet professors. You see, and the difference between activism when I was growing up and even before me is that we had to have a face-to-face relationship with the people that we were organizing. We had to communicate with them directly. We had to struggle with them physically. And the internet and instant communication removes all of that. Social networking removes that aspect. So as a consequence of that, any type of organization with this media only becomes possible when you could control the data that's at the basis of this communications. That's how Trump got elected, was manipulation of data. They weaponized data. And I mean, right here, I had one brother that owns a restaurant, sports bar here, and he told me that when he went on the internet, they had collected the data from the credit cards and debit cards of the people that have come to his restaurant over the months, and these were tourists. And so they knew exactly where the majority of people came from that ate in his restaurant. Okay, and they directed all of their information about tours of Africa and places, spots to see based on the data that they took from. They had more data on his market than he had. You see, so it's very important to understand how this is working, and we see this right now working with the George Floyd police reform bill.
You not happy with that, D?
You got jokes, man. you see, that's you a good MC, because you said, let me push this button here. Let me push this button here and put it on record, and I can step away for a minute because I know he's gonna go into streams of consciousness on.
He might black out on that one. You might black out on that
one. start foaming in on the computer keyboard and shit. But I'm just saying. But you know what I'm trying to say here is this whole fight around police in our community. We already been there and won that fight. Mm-hmm. So now we reinventing failure. Mm-hmm. It's clear to anybody that when the police come into our community, their attitude is, we will show you that we the baddest gang here. Not you, not you, not you. We are. And what was their role on the plantation? It was similar to that, wasn't it? What was their role in Jim Crow? Wasn't that the same thing? Okay. So what we're saying here is the police are doing their job when they kill us and murder us and beat us and imprison us. They're not doing anything exceptional. And once we understand that, we say, well, if that's the case, how do we deal with that? Okay, it's very, very simple. You have to go after the source of first their legal position and role in the corporate state. You have to identify them as agents of the state. Police are not workers. The police, the armed agents of the state, are not workers. You see?
And yet they have one of the strongest unions in the country.
Tell me about it. And their unions have more political clout, more political influence on policing in our community than the community does. And every politician that becomes a mayor or a city council member or becomes someone in leadership position in an urban area has to kowtow to the police, has to get their endorsement, has to talk tough about crime, has to use all these racist tropes in order to make sure that he get elected. It's almost like being on the Black Caucus and not kissing the ring of Netanyahu via AIPAC. You know, every Negro on the Congressional Black Caucus ain't gonna say jack shit about Israel and that racist settler state. You see, and so this the same thing about the police unions. How is it that whenever the Democrats are talking about police reform, they're talking about reform in American democracy, and whenever the right and the extreme right are talking about any type of reform, they're talking about stopping the socialist left. They define a Pelosi as the extreme left.
How about
Nancy
that?
Pelosi. Oh my God. That man. Now we all know that the Russians and the Soviet Union gave socialism a bad name. We know that. Okay? We know them Bolsheviks gave it a bad name. And they proved in the end to be just as Eurocentric and just as racist as the rest of Europe. You see? And but everything that so-called reformers try to implement and do in America that smacks of community empowerment and dealing with the masses of people is considered socialism. You see? And the only time we had a genuinely mass movement that identified class and wealth as the source of our oppression was when you had the Wall Street movement. And look how quick they squashed that. They squashed that. And the refugees from that Wall Street movement have been at the blockades of the white folks you see in the streets whenever you see Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and those radicals who go straight to the police station and burn it down, who go straight to the corporate buildings and burn them down, who target. These are the remnants of those who came from the anti-Wall Street movement, who have some real politics and understand that it's capitalism and these institutions in our community that are part and parcel of the white supremacist construct and police brutality. It's those white kids. And that's sad. That's sad.
Hey, listen, Dhoruba, unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes left on this one, man. And so I want to give you a chance to wrap up with any final comments for at least for this call. And then we'll have to work quickly to get you back and maybe with an extended time frame. But so before you do, but I thank you very much for joining us this morning. And of course, anytime you put up the bat signal, if we're going to answer. But any closing thoughts for right now?
Yeah. I want to close on the Bobby Rush thing because that's what we started with. Sure. So first of all, let's just say that Congress or whatever releases these files, the COINTELPRO files, and of course we want them unredacted. I think you're going to find out certain people that you think have been down with the get down weren't about that at all.
Oh, now that's interesting.
Yeah. Certain, the people that was talking about how power tasted, and right now, and right now, how wait till you find out the stuff about lampposts, and you're talking about Mac Daddy and Mackin, come on, man, to make iceberg look like like a po' boy. So you got to be careful what you wish for. You might get it. You see, and then we'll see that Fred Hampton wasn't just killed and murdered because he was a charismatic potential national leader of Black people. Fred Hampton was killed and murdered because of the destabilization and the campaign to destroy the Black Panther Party. And they knew at that particular juncture, when Fred was murdered, when Bobby Seale was in prison in New Haven, and Huey had yet to get out, and that the Central Committee in California was at a crossroads. Okay, It was at a serious crossroads. It had got Panthers in Southern California were assassinated. G had came to the forefront, the first SWAT team, and came down on the Black Panther Party, and the 21 was busted. We had there was a serious time when the Central Committee was going to change and become a more national leadership that would have involved the activists like Fred Hampton, like brothers like Mumia in Philly, and others in New York, to become active leaders on the Black Panther Party Central Committee. And so that had to be sabotaged, and it was sabotaged, and it was effectively sabotaged. And unfortunately and sadly, we still have some political prisoners still in jail, and we have the murder of Fred and Mark Clark and other Black Panthers who were murdered by law enforcement. So we need to understand that Judas and the Black Messiah was not just about the murder of Fred Hampton. It was about the destruction and destabilization and encapsulation of the idea and the notion of Black armed resistance and the destruction of the Black Panther Party.
Right on. Hey, Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, thank you very much again. Please, if you haven't already, check our channel for all the other incredible discussions we've had with Brother Dhoruba, and definitely be back because we will have more. But thank you very much. Anytime you want time, man, just holler at me, man. You know how to reach me, and we'll get you back, man.
Yeah, we're still going to do that BLA panel. We're still going to do that BLA council. It's just that I've been having problems with trying to get in touch with a couple of the two of the last brothers, but I got 3 brothers, myself included, already committed to it. So as soon as I get the other 2 brothers on board, and the reason why I say that is because each one of us brings a different flavor, a different understanding of what we went through in that process, and like I might talk a lot about the geopolitics and all of that and the split, but then you got brothers like Blood who could talk about some of the attacks on them and being having comrades murdered and that type of stuff. And then you got brothers that could talk about the connection between that and other events like Sada and her brilliant liberation. So we're looking forward to doing that. So I haven't given up on that idea, Jad.
We haven't either. And as the young people say, we're here for all of that, D. So whenever it can happen, we're here for all of it. So thank you very much, man. We definitely want to have that happen.
And Black Power Radio, Black Power Network, blackpower.org. Yep. That's right. That's what's taking place, yo.
That's what's up. You heard it here, man. That's it. That's the clip. Thanks, D, man. Take care of yourself, man. Be safe, man.
All right, you too, man.
Peace. All right, everybody. That's Dhoruba. We're not done yet, but we got more to come with DaveyD in just a minute. But big shout out to Dhoruba. Big shout out to Charo Mina Rojas and Ajamu Baraka from earlier, and to all of you for sticking around. We got a little bit more to go. Let's take a quick break, catch our breath, and come back with more I Mix What I Like live and here on Black Power Media. And we'll be back here in just a minute with DaveyD and a discussion of hip hop's historical narrative. So stick around, everybody. Appreciate you. Peace. Back in just a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, what's up, world? Back again. I mix what I like live. Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Again, shout out to Dhoruba, Ajamu, Charo, and everybody for sticking around as much as you have this morning. Please hit the like, share, subscribe button. Invite a friend, foe, comrade, colleague, and have them join the program. And check out everything that's coming up on this channel, Black Power Media. And of course, what we're going to get into in just a moment here with DaveyD. Just as a quick reminder, we're back tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for the Remix Morning Show. You don't want to miss that. Wednesday and Thursday as well. And then I'll be back Friday morning, continuing to try to hold it down until Remix goes 5 days a week. Friday morning, I'll be back with August Nimps with a critique of Black Marxism. And the I want to say famous or infamous or not enough of either journalist Barrett Brown. I'm actually very excited to have this conversation Friday. Not a member of Anonymous, if I recall correctly, but someone imprisoned for allegedly assisting Anonymous in revealing documents that were showing what the state has been doing with our media environment. And so we'll talk a little bit about political imprisonment. We'll talk about the real state of our media environment and journalism. He's got a very interesting experience and history with The Intercept and Glenn Greenwald. We're going to get into all of that. We're going to get into as well some of the latest that he's been involved in terms of FBI surveillance of activists, including Black activists here in the U.S. and more. So looking forward to that on Friday. So please, continue to stick around and come on back for that as well. All right. That said, long time asking about the tea and the crumpets, a long time, colleague, comrade, legendary journalist and DJ, co-host of Hard Knock Radio, BreakdownFM, and soon to be, or just now, a co-author with Jeff Chang. My man DaveyD, welcome to the show, brother. It's good to see you. Thanks for getting up early out there.
What up, man? Can you hear me? Can you hear me clear?
Man, appreciate you.
Can you hear me clear?
Hear you loud and clear. Appreciate it.
Okay,
yep.
Cool. Yeah.
Hope you're hearing me clear too.
Yeah, I am. Big shout out to Dhoruba. I got to get a hold of him. I haven't talked to him in a minute. That's the homie.
I tell people all the time, I don't get in touch with Dhoruba. Dhoruba reaches out to me, and when that's like people always. I get a lot of contact. People like, can you put me in touch with Dhoruba? Like, Dhoruba reaches out. I don't even know where the brother is half the time. He just says, I want to come on and talk, and we make it happen.
He's in your mind. He's in your heart. He's in your spirit.
There you go. Well put.
Yeah, but I've learned a lot from him over the years. So big shout out to him.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. And we always encourage people to go back. We have a strong catalog of interviews with him on this channel and at imixwhatilike.org. And I hope I'm not lagging too much. I see this connection issue is still creeping up. But anyway, man, let me just say this, so I know you wanted to come on. A couple years ago, I was invited, just for those who don't have this background real quick, I was invited briefly to temporarily work with the widow of C. Delores Tucker and Peter Bailey, the legendary Malcolm X historian and scholar and former comrade, on an unpublished autobiography from Tucker. And I don't honestly know whatever happened with the project, but what I was starting to compile for that, I just put on my website and try to give a few presentations on, but was essentially not so much, again, a defense. And you can go, anyone can get this at imixwhatilike.org. It's in the feature section right there. Hip Hop's Still Troubled Narrative, a Requiem for C. Delores Tucker. And essentially what I was just trying to say here is that it's not so much a defense of C. Delores Tucker as a person or a political figure, as much as it is a defense for part of her argument around the protection of rap music from becoming commercial property and corporate product. turned against our community and our youth in particular. And one of the things that I did notice in preparing this was that long story short, that the narrative that has emerged around hip hop's history, part of which condemns Tucker as being part of an old school, repressive, petty bourgeois, old civil rights with her own flawed political career, sort of attack on hip hop. And that the frame was, initially that hip hop had to be defended against those saying it was just a fad or was just some anti-black backwardsness. And I think, in part, as part of that defense, what has ended up happening in the construction of a narrative that is supported, I would argue, by the corporate arena, by the state itself, that hip hop has helped drag Black and brown people out of relative poverty and obscurity in the 70s into a popular dominating force, cultural, if nothing else, force globally. And that this has all been about the tanning of America and the multiculturalizing of America and the broadening of America, even that brought us Obama and all this stuff. So to defend this narrative, which I argue is false, there was this need or emphasis to critique people like Tucker, but to the point where her argument was distorted, misquoted, misrepresented, and used as part of what I think is a very conservative defense of hip hop that ultimately ends up supporting much more right-wing conservative forces than certainly see Delores Tucker. So I'll stop there with that brief summary. I've already talked about that here on this channel. But Davey, you said you wanted, for lack of a better way of putting it, you had a criticism of my argument here, and obviously you're more than welcome to share. So anyway, go ahead, my man, and we'll go from there.
Well, I mean, I listened to the argument and I thought there was a lot of conflating of a variety of ideas. I mean, first of all, let me just say, I think history will and has proven that C. Delores Tucker was right on a number of points in her critique of the type of music that was being put out by corporations. I'll say that, but I think in talking about the narrative, it's important to situate ourselves in the time in which it was being constructed, in what was going on, and the forces that were at work, the very real forces that were at work, that people felt that they weren't felt, they were actually dealing with. So that's one aspect of it, and we can get into that. The second thing is, in terms of Tucker herself, the reason why the narrative showed up the way that it did was because there was a lot of policing and conversation within hip hop about some of the things that she brought up. And there were very active figures. There were movements that had already been in place that she was never a part of. So it'd be like, there's already been a train that left the station. There's already been people on that train battling this thing. And she kind of came into people's purview, Johnny come lately, if you will, and never really had a conversation, at least with those forces that were at work. None of the people that were involved with the meeting of the minds conversations at the Latin Quarters back in the 80s, which really led to what people called the golden era of hip hop and definitely ushered in the whole concept of Afrocentricity to a younger generation who had never heard those terms. There was no conversation with that. There was no conversation with the type of work that was being done at places like The Good Life or even at the Upper Room and other places where you saw progressive to radical type of outlooks on how we could move this thing called hip hop forward. And those places, I should say, were not fringed. The footprint of what those movements that I mentioned brought to the table exist to this day and have informed a lot of people. So the way that Tucker comes on the scene, in the backdrop, she's right alongside the PMRC, who overlooked and obscured some very important things that were going on in hip hop. She comes along the scene with folks who were, in my opinion, trying to be very theatrical. So the rolling of tapes in front of record stores.
Calvin
Makes for
Butts
good
and all
TV.
that.
Yeah, Calvin Butts. It makes for good TV, but it wasn't a conversation. And at that time, I remember talking with everybody from Snoop on down. It's like, these people, I don't even know them. They never had a conversation with me. Now, at the time that this is happening, I think I want to say it was maybe 92, 93. You're not talking about kids anymore. You're talking about young adults. So you could have easily got on the phone and figured it out the same way that journalists and everybody else, including myself, had to get a hold of them. So to give a little backdrop for people who don't know what I've been a part of and how I kind of enter this, we raised these concerns about certain types of music, I want to say back in 88, 89. The show that I did, we would play Malcolm X, we would play King, we play Kwame Ture, we play a lot of speeches over music beats. And one day, a good friend of mine who did another show, Kevy Kev, said, how is it that you can play Malcolm X and then play NWA in the same show? NWA got their first interviews on our show up in the Bay Area. And so it was a good question. And we said, well, maybe we discuss this. So we had 2 weeks worth of discussion on air. It involved everybody from the members of Digital Underground on up to, our crew and the folks that did the 3 preeminent hip hop shows in the Bay Area. We did 2 weeks. And, those are all online and everything. And the agreement was, if the majority of our listeners felt that it was inappropriate to kind of play this music, then we would not do it. And so about 60-40 agreed, said, I don't know if it's appropriate to play this. So we said, we're going to boycott it. 2 weeks after that boycott, we had NWA on. We did a big interview with them. We informed them what was happening and why in the context of which it was. And that boycott went on for about a good 2.5 years. I bring this out because this was something that not only made nationwide, it was covered nationwide, but it also raised the conversation and the critiques that see Delores Tucker 4 or 5 years later would bring to the forefront. But it was never done in the type of what's the word I'm looking for? It was never done with the type of input that we got from community, at least in the way that we did it, from the artist. It was never done the way that we felt was coming out of a place of love. This seemed to be alongside the very forces that had been against hip hop and, more importantly, Black expression from day one. So that's part of the gist of it. I started off by talking about, her critiques and the way that she went about it. She had valid critiques, but my question would have been, what was the conversation with some of the women at the time that were doing things? That might have been Yo-Yo, who had her own organization, Intelligent Black Women Coalition. What was the conversation with Queen Latifah? What was the conversation with MC Lyte and, a host of others? What was the conversation with, folks like Public Enemy? Where was that conversation to maybe figure out how to enhance the work that they were doing versus the approach that she took, which was to clamp down on people who were enormously popular, and not because of corporations, but because of what they were doing? Example, Tupac. So I don't want to go on, but let's start building from some.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I don't know if Tahir is being comical here, but this is sort of missing my point. And I think this is sort of where my argument has gotten lost previously. I'm not trying to resuscitate C. Delores Tucker. So I would hope people would check out the piece that I actually wrote, because what I'm saying there, and maybe the title of a Requiem for C. Delores Tucker, which I meant a little facetiously, is being misunderstood. But but my point isn't that anything that you said is wrong. My point primarily is that the reconstruction of Tucker's argument that has taken place in the examples that I provide in early journalism, in Chang and Charnas's work, just as 3 prominent examples, is it misrepresents Tucker's argument not to make the points that you're making, but to make the point that that this old woman was just wrong. Hip hop had every right to do blah blah blah, and as if to support, as Charna says in his book, that hip hop is an American capitalist success story. So to promote that mythological narrative, the condemnation of Tucker, I'm arguing, is disingenuous, because they're not making the argument that you're making, that Tucker was representing a conservative bougie thing, and that was meant to suppress a more progressive, radical, militant, thoughtful, activist, community and content and music. That's not the argument. The argument is just to use her as a straw to say these old civil rights Negroes were condemning us. We pushed past them, and look where we are today. That's what the narrative is supposed to say. But my point is, look where we are today. A handful of corporations control all the outlets, control all the popularization of the art. The wealth is extracted out of Black and brown communities at a greater pace than ever. We still don't have, any higher degrees of Black ownership. The reports show that artists get less per digital download than they were getting from spins and sales back in the day. So we're not progressing. So I'm saying that her fundamental argument was still correct. She was a flawed vessel, but the idea that corporations are going to destroy our cultural production with the intent, as she pointed out, to justify more incarceration and police violence against our youth, that is correct. And the people that are condemning her are not highlighting that point. That's really where I'm trying to go.
Okay, so I don't want to make it a debate per se, but because I think outside forces will use Tucker pro and con, and she was used pro and con. Conservative forces used her, and people who have other agendas will use her. She'll be the boogeyman in both parts of town, or the boogie woman. But with that being said, I think the important thing is to have, for us as Black folks, to have a larger context in which things were happening, and to build from there. And that's what I felt was important, irregardless of what others have written. Because we lived through this, and a lot of the work that some of those people did had to come from people like ourselves who did these boycotts and had these hard conversations and lived in these communities. So the backdrop of a lot of this, which also has an enormous footprint, was the crack era. And that's something that's left out of everybody's narrative, including hers. So we have to kind of first deal with what the ravages of crack was doing at that particular time, and the type of funneling of Black talent that emerged out of it, meaning that people said either you can get into sports or you can get into entertainment, or you can, be out here and you can be addicted the same way that the users were to the enormous amount of money that was coming into our community for people who were invested in that trade. You also have to remember during this time, it was very violent. There was an enormous amount of violence. And this is why I come back to the work that was being done. And you could get somebody like a Paradise Gray on, who wrote a book about, the Latin Quarter, or you get Daddy-O from Stetsasonic, and then have this conversation that what was going on in the middle of at the height of the crack epidemic was these clandestine meetings with all the top artists to talk about what can we do? How can we turn things around? This comes in the wake of the killing of Scott LaRock, but they had a series of meetings called the Meetings of the Minds. And within those meetings, out of those meetings came the Stop the Violence movement, more than just a record, but these commitments to really, deal and address Black on Black crime. Out of that came the Artists Against Apartheid. So you had a lot of people.
Hey, Davey, real quick, forgive the interruption, but I got to ask this. My man, Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs, I got to credit him with this. His argument is he has a critique of the Stop the Violence movement, which it suggests is that it was more of a Black bougie conservative call to keep venues open for performances, which were being shut to rappers, causing a lack of business that precipitated that movement as much as anything else.
It's
is there any? What do you think about?
I think that's a little simplistic. There's some truth to it. Yeah, there was. Anybody who found that their lines of their opportunity to make money at a time when it was hard to do, This is your business. Of
Mhm.
course, you're going to figure out ways in which to do it, but to stop the violence movement,
Mhm.
the impetus behind it, to simply say that it was a way to keep venues open, I think is just overly simplistic.
Oh.
And it was not in the heart and the minds of the people that I know that were involved in it.
Sure.
People wanted to make sure and wanted to do something with their talent. Remember, you talk about 17 and 18-year-olds,
Mhm.
right? So they don't necessarily have all the political
No, but I mean,
know-how.
it's a lot like in similar to today, where the people who are on the front or on the mic who may be young are not necessarily in control of the process that puts them there or that is driving the movement, which is often people who are older. So that's where I would, but anyway. Yeah.
All Black movements and Black expression gets used sooner or later by different forces. The question is exactly which forces. So, of course, when Stop the Violence came up, it partnered with, for a period of time, I want to say, the Urban League, right? Of course, there were going to be people that were around that said, well, this is a good thing. It can help open the venues, but the point is the people at that meeting did not sit up there and say, this is a way to keep the venues open, even though that was the reality that they were dealing with. They were looking at the fact that at that club, people were getting killed. They were looking at the fact that one of their icons, the first, Scott LaRock, had been killed. They were looking at the fact that this was a conversation that was coming up in the community because you were starting to see the emergence of this violence connected with the crack trade that was happening. So these were folks that I think very earnestly were trying to figure out how to do that. And yes, it was also going to threaten some of the places that people wanted to go to.
No, go ahead.
That's one thing. So the second thing that you had was the apartheid thing, which I think is something that's often left out. And it was connected to the violence in this way. Many people were getting their gold chains snatched. And this was a very intentional thing. Like, look, these gold is coming from South Africa. So we need to, if we want to have an effect, let's stop wearing this gold and we can kill two birds with one stone. One, we can stop people. We're going to put a new value on things. It's not going to be gold. It's going to be these African medallions. And those who want to perform on, at least at the stage, we're going to take those medallions. We're going to take those chains off, have you put on the medallions. So these are things that people are trying to do. Let's shift the values. Let's put values in this over the gold. And so, they did the posse songs. They raised awareness. Stetsasonic did the whole thing with Free South Africa and joined. I forget the movement that they joined, but people gave voice to that. And then the last thing that they were dealing with trying to do education. The HEAL project comes out of that, raising money for schools, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of things that folks were doing. The three. So that.
But this is what I'm saying, and so Brother Tahir is definitely not feeling me, but he's missing my point. So Tahir, one, because I want to forgive me for doing this, but Tahir, I want to use you because I think you're emblematic of what happens with critics of my argument. So first, I want to make sure that you do go check the link and read actually what I've said here. So I'll put that in that so that I don't think you're very clear here on what I'm saying. With all due respect, but to this point, first of all, Trisha Rose was I think both of them were writing on this a little earlier than 94, but I think that's funny that you use 94 because to what you're saying, Tahir, and Davey, what you're saying, I think this is why I put in this piece here extended excerpts from Tucker's statements that are, I think, intentionally kept out of the dominant narratives that are written by the folks in certainly in hip hop scholarship, and those that I cite here in this piece. So, for instance,
we get that. We get that. Not to cut you off, but I just want to. I want to just make sure that we have some of this framed right. Right.
I know, but Davey, see, this is exactly my point, because what you're saying about what hip hop and activists were doing in the late 80s or in the 80s and going into the 90s is exactly the point I'm making in my larger point, that the commercial environment, which are representatives of the state and allow the elite to rule in anonymity, that's all corporations are here really to do. That their involvement beginning more aggressively in the early to mid 90s was a response to what you're talking about was happening more organically and naturally within the community that was both producing rap music and hip hop culture, but looking to engage politics more broadly speaking. There was this tremendous undercurrent that I think is under discussed in a lot of the prominent hip hop scholarship and journalism, and that is left out of the context that both this criticism that I'm waging and that Tucker herself was looking to develop emerges.
But Tucker wasn't developing that critique, and let me make my point. That's the larger thing. The reason why I'm walking you through this timeline, if you start talking about 87, 88, 89, around this time, you have the PMRC that starts to form, right? And so within the PMRC, sure, they go after NWA, who's on the scene. They go after some of the rock folks, but then they quickly pivot and they start coming after the artists. They go after 2 Live Crew, but they also went after Public Enemy. They also went after some of the positive groups, you know, and we're finding things. For example, I remember having to go on CBS TV, one of the affiliates out here, because of by the time I get to Arizona video, right? And on that newscast, they were calling, you know, Public Enemy a very violent group whose music should be boycotted because in the song, you know, Coming to Arizona, they show the blowing up a car of a senator and the poisoning of a senator that refused to put the holidays together. X-Clan came under fire, primarily because they helped lead that big march with the December 12th movement and others, you know, across the Brooklyn Bridge in response to Yusef Hawkins. So you had all these Afrocentric groups that were coming under fire. So either they were called anti-Semitic because of some of their remarks, or they were called violent
Tucker's
because
not
of their
involved in
rhetoric.
any of this, though.
She's not
involved in any of that. That's my point.
Right.
Okay.
She's nowhere to be seen on that, right?
That's my point.
But the forces that she aligned herself with they were the ones that were leading that charge.
This is the point. Please, if I could be allowed to make this point, this is what I'm trying to get at that is being misunderstood here. That yes, she aligns herself with these white, right, conservative, culture vulture, whatever folks to make her, like William Bennett and others, to make the point. But the very people that are condemning her are aligning themselves with the very same corporate American world to promote a version of our art and our cultural expression that is harmful to us. That far outweighs the power and damage done by a William Bennett. So that's one huge contradiction.
I don't follow. Break that
what do
down
you mean
for
you don't
me.
follow? The argument, because Davey, the argument was to Tucker and others, don't be critical of the corporate world that is involving itself in hip hop, because you're condemning Black youth and Black cultural expression and Black freedom of speech. And in so doing, that sides with the very corporate world that has been intentionally destroying the popular cultural expression of Black people to do the very thing C. Delores Tucker has been saying. If I could please finish this one little point so I can read, I just want to share these 2 quick segments from excerpts of Tucker's work that has been intentionally removed by the most popular hip hop scholars and journalists for decades, and is continuing to, I think, confuse the discussion in the chat and even a little bit that we're having. So again, I am not defending Tucker or her politics. She is, from my vantage point, a conservative, civil rights, bougie, so on and so on and so on and so on. That's not my point. My point is she is being used as a straw argument by the very people who are themselves no more politically left than she was, and who themselves want to defend and promote a historical narrative of hip hop that allows for us to be confused about what hip hop has meant for a supposed advance for Black and brown people, and for us to lose sight of the fact that as hip hop has become more popular, the material conditions of the people that produce it has gotten worse. All right, so this is the 2 quick points I want to say that are constantly left out. So she says here, for the record, I wish to state that the NPCBW, which is her organization, is not against rap. It is not against hip hop. To the contrary, we support and encourage the artistic creativity of our young people. We love our young people. However, we are against gangster rap and misogynist lyrics. Some $780 million worth of rap records were sold in 1993, again, which predates what Tahir is saying she wasn't involved. And more than half of the purchasers being underage of 17, and 50% of these minors were between the ages of 10 and 14. Something must be done. It is our moral responsibility, so on and so on and so on. And the other piece here that is constantly left out in terms of your point about the not understanding the context of drugs and crack cocaine, she says here, as an illustration of this, let me share with you excerpts from a letter I received from a prisoner in Lorton, Virginia. He said, rappers make it sound so good and look so real that I would drink and smoke drugs like on video, thinking that this was the only way I could become somebody. My hood girls became hoes and bitches. What is so bad about it is they accepted it. You know why? Because they put themselves in a video too, and the guns, money, cars, drugs, and men become a reality. Look where this kind of thinking got me, facing 25 years to life. Racism and greed are the sustaining forces behind gangster rap. It is no coincidence that the characters displaying the most indecent behavior for all the public to see are African Americans. Some argue that these artists are merely speaking frankly about their reality and Black cultural experiences, but as Dr. Benjamin Hooks, former executive director of the NAACP, has noted, our cultural experience does not include debasing our women, glorification of violence, deviant sexual behavior. So I'm only sharing those brief excerpts to point out, one, that her argument is different than it's popularly reported, whatever her reasons are, and that they're not excerpted properly. She's not quoted properly. Those comments and others that I outlined in that piece have been kept out of the narratives developed by Chang, Charnas, certainly Dyson and others, as I talk about in the piece. And all ultimately, and I'll stop here for your response, all ultimately to the benefit of allowing the very corporate takeover that Tucker has been or was warning of, that is more powerful today than ever, and has done what she was rightly calling out, that these folks have erased from the narrative. That's close to my point. Go ahead.
Okay, so the letter that she reads is a very elementary type of letter in comparison to the complex type of analysis and conversations people were having by 93, 94. That was an argument that we may have had in 88, 89. In fact, we did. If I pull up, the arguments that we had, the debates that we had around the NWA boycott, that was the discussion then.
Davey, it's an argument I make in 2021. My only point of bringing that up, Davey, is to say that has been left out. It's not about her being right. It's to say that has been essentially kept out of the discussion.
Let me make my point.
Right.
Okay, so, we're not, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about what the narrative was at that time. Mm-hmm. So when this comes out, this letter, it's like we already been down this path and we've already moved. And part of what the movement was at that time was like, look, people are going to express themselves the way that they do. Let's just make sure this other expression, which at the time, at least going up into about 92, the predominant type of rhetoric that you were hearing from the artists was more in that golden era Afrocentric point more than the other. That's where the big footprint was. So that's one point. The second thing is when you go back to what was happening at that time, hip hop was engaged in another battle. And that battle was, where was it going to find a home? So I remember very distinctly, Black radio stations, with the exception of a few. There might have been, I think, Tolliver ran one in Cleveland. There was another one out of Houston, and definitely the station in Los Angeles, K-Day, where, which I don't think was Black owned, but definitely all Black formatted, where most stations were like, we don't want this. We don't want this at all. We're not trying to play this rap. We don't care if you're Public Enemy or if you're Two Live Crew. Maybe we'll do a Saturday night mix show, right? And many folks found themselves trying to find his home, and the places that opened it up tended to be on the crossover side of things. And so with the opening of that also came the opening up of hip hop to the crossover aspects of the music labels themselves. So I could tell you stories anecdotally about people sitting, at the, outside the doors of some of these Black radio stations. Can I get a job? Can I come on the air? Can I be a part of that? And these were the folks that were the gatekeepers that were saying no. I could tell you the stories of being at the New Music Seminar and seeing a young Dana Owens, who was just Latifah, jamming up, Black executives and saying, why are you not playing our music on the air? This is before they became superstars. We're talking about in the 80s, and these folks telling them that this music had no place, had no home, and that they didn't think it was worthy. So people went to other places that said, you know what, we will take this wholesale. What you saying? Fight the power. We'll put this on the air. What are you saying? Red, black, and green. We will play this. X-Clan will tell you they got their first major radio play on the crossover station out here, not the Black-owned stations, right? And so what you started to have was relationship. And the music business, as you know, is a business of relationships. And some of those relationships will be some white boys. It may be also be some Black folks. It may be your own peers who happen to get into key positions, which was starting to happen by 92, 93. You started to have the ascension of some of these folks who were coming out of hip hop and saying, let me pull this, let me pull that, and let me do this. So the complexities that folks were now starting to discuss in 93, 94, Tucker wasn't around. So to hear I saw his comment was right. She was not in those rooms. And so it raised the question is, who is nurturing and who is supporting? Who's in the ears and who is around these folks to give them guidance and to give them, encouragement? And you didn't have that. You didn't have it from all these folks, the civil rights generation, if you will. You had it coming from a lot of other people, and many, latched on to certain figures. So if Tupac would have been somebody, who had a harsh critique, but Tupac was also being heralded as like, look, this is a manifestation of what we were back in, once upon a time. He's a continuation of the freedom struggle. You had people say that, elders. You had the Nation of Islam and others that were very supportive of a lot of the Afrocentric groups. So people aligned themselves with where they saw things going. Tucker wasn't in those conversations. Now, when she went to the Senate, none of those artists were there in the Senate to speak. She was there representing the Black community. I think Ron Starworth was there.
And Dyson was there to represent the artists. And but this is my point, Davey. Again,
the artists themselves weren't there. And no disrespect to Dyson, he wasn't in those meeting of the mind things at the Latin Quarter.
I'm not defending him either. I don't want him to be involved in. What I'm saying is Dyson and others consistently misrepresent Tucker's argument to make their own conservative argument that ultimately ends up siding with the corporate world that has done and continues to do all this damage. So I'm not defending Tucker. I don't agree with Tucker and her politics, which may be one of the reasons why I never heard back from her widow about my piece being involved in this book. But my point is that it's at the same time, it is disingenuous for people to misrepresent her argument, to literally truncate her commentary, to represent it in a way to defend their own non-radical critique. Their own argument is that hip hop has been all to the good for Black people in the country and the world. And I'm saying that narrative is garbage. And
that's not how a lot of people within hip hop see it.
Okay, but my point is make the argument without disingenuously representing someone else's statements. That's my only point.
But the argument against Tucker were very genuine. That's how people saw her. So you can highlight the people who. But
Davey, I'm not talking about the rap. Look, I heard all the. Look, I listened. I rocked the lyric. I said them myself. See, Delores Tucker, you evil motherfucker. All of that stuff. I said all of it with the rappers, with KRS, with everybody back in the day. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying now, as we have the ability, as an academic, as a journalist, as a whoever, to say, let's look at the historical narrative that has emerged since then about hip hop. I'm saying that if we look at that, we can say, look, looking back, we can say, wow, look at what early journalists did and what they did wrong. Look at what more recent hip hop scholarship has done and done incorrectly. And even more recent hip hop scholarship continues to do incorrectly in representing this woman's argument falsely as a straw to present a more to present some other. So I'm not critical of the artists back in the day. I'm not critical of myself as a young hip hop connoisseur for siding with the artists and condemning all of these bougie and the Tuckers and all that. What I'm saying is I'm not that same young man anymore. And as someone who has been able to look back and read and actually look at what she actually said and what was said about her, I'm arguing there has been a reconstruction, not to defend her, but to defend the point that all the stuff that you were talking about in terms of the early attempts within the community to defend against the imposition of jewelry and commercial this and that, that lovely history has been suppressed beneath this narrative that hip hop is the trajectory of it has been all linear and all positive, all to the good, and people like Tucker were always wrong and should.
Where has it been suppressed?
Where has what been suppressed?
The efforts of the golden era that we're talking about, because that's out there. There's been books written, there's been documentaries that's been put out.
It's not, and I'm talking about a dominant narrative, Davey. When you turn on these commercials, look, I just taught a class this semester. I know you teach all the, and when you look at all the dominant, the histories that come on about hip hop and all the commercial documentary, I'm not talking about all that is. In fact, the point, and even in the piece that I'm citing here, I reference some of that scholarship, some of it even Trisha Rose, Errol Henry, all this scholarship that has pointed, James Spady, that has pointed to this history that you're talking about, but they're not recounted in these narratives. That's not the dominant narrative even in Chang's work. That's not what shows up on CNN and MSNBC and when they do these let's look at hip hop, and when they talk about the tanning of America, and when they do the hip hop histories with the new version of Queen Latifah and LL and all. They're not talking about the Latin quarters, this and the medallion. They're not doing any of that history. They're not promoting that, and they're certainly not talking about it in the context of a commercial, corporate, imperial imposition of this anti-black, anti-woman, commercial, hyper capitalist form of art. That's not the discussion. It's again, it's discussed in the context that it's an American capitalist success story, and it's not in a sort of colonial conquest. So my argument again, well, anyway, so that's what I'll just let me stop there and give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, I mean, look, from the standpoint of people involved, hip hop is a success story. You may disagree, but I feel as somebody who's been involved since '76, I owe my success to this. I think the people that I've come up with would say that there's a lot of success around that. Now, we may have a different alignment politically. We may define success differently. But the point is how people see it and how they ultimately articulate what they feel is successful. I got to go by what they feel is genuine. Now, does that mean that the things that people can point out, mass incarceration and income inequality and all these things don't exist? They absolutely do.
They're worse. They're all worse.
Right. Yeah, but that's not because of hip hop. I'd say that.
No, my point is hip hop didn't save anything. That's my point.
Nobody said that it's well.
Look, they told us it got us Obama, and that was a good thing. I disagree with that. It told us. Wait
a second. Yeah, but if you were, I was in the room with the 10,000 people in Houston. Now, you might have been the lone voice to say no, but I saw those 10,000 people of a who's who.
What are you talking about? I wasn't in the Houston one. Which one are you talking about there?
At the Ozone Awards, when they made that commitment with everybody from Rick Ross to David Banner, all those artists were there, and they talked about what they were going to do. It's online. You could see it there. I filmed it. They talked. And they said they're going
to do what?
They were going to put on their Sunday best. I think it was either Killer Mike or David. I think it was Killer Mike or David Banner that said we're going to put on our Sunday best and make sure that this man gets elected. They were part of that history. I was in Houston with
But
Bun
I think
B
that's a
and-
negative. That's not a positive, because
Well,
the
yeah,
room
but
I
you
was
make-
in, the room I was in was in 2004 in Newark, when everybody at the hip hop convention said we had to support John Kerry, and I was like, oh hell no, this is a mistake. And what you're talking about is a culmination of the mistake I saw happening in 2004.
That's fine. That's fine. You know, we can. I understand where you're coming from. I'm just sitting here and I'm saying that people who have their understanding of politics, who have their own agency, right? Nobody's putting a gun to their head, who have their outlook and understanding. Maybe it's naive, maybe it's a mistake, maybe it's all those things. I can give you that. But this is what they felt at that moment. In 2004, this is what they felt in 2008. And any of us who had a different perspective had to figure out, or was charged with how to figure out how we're going to change minds to move in another direction. You know, and I would say, from having been there at some of those places, this wasn't because big corporate money came there. The labels weren't there at the ozone thing saying this is what you got to do. These were people who looked around, who were basically our age and, you know, or close to it, who said, this is what I think I want to do. I live in Arkansas. This is what my mom
But Davey,
wanted.
you're talking about, when you were talking a few minutes ago about the lack of sophistication in the argument from that C. Delores Tucker letter. My point is you're doing a disservice to all the analysis that has evolved since then. So I'm not saying Davey, okay. I'm not saying corporations stand over somebody and say this, say that. It's not that easy. It's more sophisticated than that. The reason those artists were there with enough prominence to have a voice at that ozone gathering is because they were already representing a politics that the corporate world would want to promote and make popular, which was to the detriment of radical traditions and trajectories that were pre-existent and still existent in both hip hop and outside in the community.
I think you would have to talk to those people.
I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to talk to them. No, Davey, you don't have to talk to an artist to understand how the corporate world relates to artists and why they promote artists over other artists.
I think you have to talk to people. First of all, that's not across the board true in terms of who got promoted and who didn't. I mean, that's a very simplistic thing. If I'm down in Houston, yeah, because if we're talking about a lot of independent artists, say somebody like a Trade of Truth, for example, in Houston, that's not corporate back. That's somebody.
Davey, I'm not. Come on now, that's not fair. You can't use your brilliant and in-depth knowledge of everything in hip-hop. Why not? Because that artist, nobody knows who that artist is outside of you, and none of the students in my classroom know who that artist is. They know who is the heavily promoted artist. No, Davey, they don't know who that is. They don't know who that is.
Listen,
he doesn't have an influence that Killer Mike has, or that Nas or Jay-Z has. Come on, man.
Really?
Yeah, really.
I'm going to use that as an example. Okay. Look up Trade of Truth.
Okay.
And see his influence in Houston. And I probably would argue
in Houston. Okay, but I'm talking about a national politics.
But we're talking about things of regional. And people respond regionally, just like the Bay is regional, just like Houston is regional, Chicago's regional, DC is regional. And those regional things may have a narrative that threads across lines. So just because, let me make my point. So I would never say my class is the barometer for what is happening and not happening. What I'm going to look at is, how do people respond to people that they find influential in their particular region. Now, what ultimately gets uplifted by CNN and corporations, we can debate whether or not that ultimately turns the tide, so to speak. You know, that's a whole other argument and a whole other show. But what I'm going to say, and I'm emphatically will say this, is that people have their agencies and have their own way in which they come to political conclusions. I don't want to get hung up in this. What I was just sitting there saying is that a large number of people took a political stance and moved in a particular political direction, for better or for worse. It may not be the one that you, me, or people listening agreed with, but it's one that they did take. And it's a reality that we had to deal with. To sit there and shit on them and say, nah, they was wrong. I think it's like, well, did you have that conversation? You told me you don't need to have the conversation. I did have those conversations. We did a whole documentary on them. We with our own money. We went around and talked and asked people those
But that's
questions.
not what I was saying, Davey.
But this is what I'm saying to give a larger context in which we're talking about, right? The reason why I said with the Delores Tucker thing, to come back to, I said I agree with you, and I feel that she was right in the long run on most of what she said. Her stance against the misogyny and the types of things that were being peddled by corporations, she was spot on. And we did not see that at the time. But I was also saying there was a context that we needed to be situated in to understand why and why those arguments continued. And so I was painting that picture and I was saying, here were some of the things that were going on. And this is why the reaction to her was so visceral, because that's what you really saw, was a visceral reaction to her. And it wasn't because she just showed up. They didn't have a visceral reaction to Tipper Gore and others. They had one to her, you know, and there was a reason for that. And so I was trying to put that in context to say that whether it was her intention or not, the perception that people had was she was aligned. She was in the same room with the very people that wouldn't play those records when they were talking about Fight the Power. She was in the same room with those people. Those were her peers. So it was hard, and people didn't know how to separate her from the other folks that were sitting there because they all ran in the same circles. They came from the same cloth. So now we can look back and say, well, damn, you know what? She was a little bit different than Frankie Crocker. I'm just using a name. She was a little bit different than Bruce, who told Queen Latifah he wasn't going to play her thing, right? She was different. She was a different cut. But at that time, it wasn't seen that way. And so she was dismissed alongside with all those others.
But Davey, what I'm trying to say in my piece,
and I'll close with this.
Right.
I'll close with this. So she was dismissed with all of them, the same way that we wouldn't unearth the deeper meaning of some of those people who initially rejected hip hop is the same type of thing that happened with her. She was a part of it. It's like, I'm not trying to check for you, him, or her. You all were in the same cloth. Y'all can, you know, walk off. Now, others like you and myself, we did look back and we were able to see like, oh, damn, she made some points. But even when she made those points in 94, I'm just giving the context into why it wasn't heard and still hasn't been heard in some circles.
But again, you're that is not my argument. I am not being critical of what was said back in the early 90s. I am only recounting what was said back in the early 90s to be critical of what has continuously been said about that time period by people writing since then. So the early journalists, they started the problem. That's what I start to outline. I use Chang and Charnas as very recent, dominant hip-hop historians whose works have been used to to overlay all of the other work you were talking rightly about earlier that make other points and have other emphasis. So what I'm saying is the narrative frame that looking back on that time period has been falsely created to justify something that's happening today that I don't agree with should be considered progress. So that's my point. The only thing I was trying to say about not having to talk to artists wasn't to sound as demeaning as I think you were reframing it and recounting it. I'm saying I don't need to talk to an artist to understand the corporate relationship they have or to understand what the corporation is trying to do with that artist. And I certainly don't have to talk to an artist to understand why a corporation would be promoting that artist over another. I just simply have to look at and listen to their content. And what I'm arguing is the very corporate takeover that Tucker and others were warning about in their own imperfect ways, deserving of criticism then and now, is correct and has taken place and is not being properly accounted for, as this dominant narrative is saying, hey man, everything is more or less better or in progressing or has gotten, or it has improved largely because of the wonders of hip hop. And I'm saying, as much as I love hip hop and all of its wonders, it has not led to the kind of improved world that many want to give it credit for. In fact, it has been used to deny an advance and to cover the lack of an advance. That's really. But that said, look, man, I know we're coming up on an hour and I want to at least give you time. And I know it's going to sound kind of funny, and I think it is kind of funny, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about the new work you're doing with Jeff Chang because I mean, because I was late to knowing about it. I admit that, and so at least please tell us about it.
So first of all, in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, the first edition, that was published in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And he started it 10 years prior. Mm-hmm. So when he starts writing, it's in the middle of the Tucker thing.
Look, man, he has man. I'm not gonna look. He had every right and all the time in the world to go back and get right. No.
Right. I'm just telling you.
And he had a fat advance to do. He had all the money and time in the world to get it right. He can talk for himself.
He
can. He has here. Yep.
You asked me to.
Yeah, I hear you. My bad. Go ahead.
Okay, so don't cut it off and tell me that we're wrong.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying he had a chance to do it.
You got to talk to the man. You got to talk to the man himself to ask.
I have, Davey.
And this is what he said. What he said? What, for the record?
Honestly, I don't remember the interviews online. I mixwhatilike.org. People can go. I'll put the link in the show notes. He disagrees with me. He agreed. He disagrees with me. Everybody disagrees with me. That's why I wrote the piece. That's why I wrote the piece. Show me where I'm wrong.
Okay, so I just want to say that in this one we took things up to 2020. Mm-hmm. We wrote a lot of parts of it. We added a lot of things that were left out in the first one. We centered women a lot. We looked at the contributions of women from page 1 to page 2. We take it all the way up to the George Floyd protests. We take it all the way up to the pandemic. We look at what's getting ready to unfold with the 2020 elections. So that's where it kind of ends. I think, we look at regional histories, which is what I was alluding to before, and we look at the impact of that, how people were seeing the world. Initially back in 92, Tupac talks about that in our early interviews. He talks about the regional influences and how things were. He didn't want to see things centralized. And if there was a corporate takeover, it's when it's centralized. But where we're at now, and from all the stuff I've done, we might have done about 40 interviews on this book. People want regional stuff. They, it's like, what's the Detroit history? The New York narrative is cool, but, we just did a big thing in Detroit. And I mean, all their pioneers are there and they have a story to tell. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Chicago, same thing with Boston. And so we looked at those regional histories that are about, at this point, maybe 30, 40 years, with a lot of intricacies and a lot of different directions that we think are interesting. We knew we couldn't cover all that in depth, but we wanted to acknowledge it and give people taste and pass the baton to others to go deeper. We look at, we talk about the meeting of the minds and those things that were taking place during the Afrocentric period, because that was a narrative that was left out. We talked about Pac and Biggie, and we talked about the big meeting that was in Chicago, where we met with the minister and Kwame Ture, and the type of conversations that he had, which at the time, the minister asked us not to share all the content because people were very vulnerable and people were very forthcoming. And he, so the parts that we did were things that we actually.
So you saying you got the missing Farrakhan tapes in this new book?
No, it's not the missing thing, because and it wasn't, I wouldn't say the missing Farrakhan, because everybody was there at the meeting. Yeah. Everybody was there at the meeting. And 2 weeks after this was after Biggie got killed. 2 weeks afterwards, they came on the air. And so I was allowed to play one of the things. They asked not to play the tapes, but they said you could play this part. And so, of course, we recount that in the book. And I've written about that before. But we talked about the outcome of that and the imprint that I think that meeting had with the way that people moved afterwards. We talk about, Ferguson, Grant, and all those things. So we continue giving it a political and social justice lens that we look at it from, and just kind of round out that history. So it was designed for quote unquote a younger audience. I don't think we diluted anything, but when we say younger, the way I explain it is that instead of maybe referencing a group like X-Clan, who me and you would know, we may say, Cardi B or somebody who they would know, and we start building from there.
And plus, Cardi B, X-Clan, it's about the same content. It's about the same thing. You know,
Well-
WAP for S-Clan is, you know, West African pride, right?
I'm not mad at WAP, and I'm not mad at the song.
All right, hey, whatever. No, hey,
You know, but I'm not, and you know, and a lot of people aren't mad at it. The same
Not
way we
mad.
weren't mad, same way that people weren't mad at Lil Kim, the same way they weren't mad at any other artist that was salacious back in the days, whether they were on screen or on record. And you know, there's a line to that. There's always been that salaciousness in our community. Some of it was more underground than others, but you know, the Pam Greers and the
Amen.
you know,
Pam Greer, Lord have mercy.
there you go.
Lord have mercy.
You know what I'm saying? So, but we don't stay focused on that. You know, we're looking at the Cyrocs and Rhapsodies as well. So,
Right
you know,
on.
I think, yeah. So we cover a lot of ground. We look at things internationally, you know, some of the things that's been popping off, and it's a good book. I think we did our thing on it. You know, a lot of people seem to really embrace it and like it, and we showed a lot of the intentionalities that people had, whether it was the gang truces and, you know, these meetings of the minds or these other meetings that people, you know, were like, look, I don't like what's going on. How can we change the dynamic for better or for worse? We acknowledged the efforts and looked at, you know, the ways in which people did, including the political conventions, you know, including Rosa running, you know, for the Green Party and all that. You know, we put all that in there to show that, look, people didn't like what was going on. They picked up things and they said, let's try it ourselves. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
So that's
and some things we're still looking at. Yeah.
The Can't Stop Won't Stop Young Adult Edition. I'm late to getting it, man. I have to honestly have to get it and check it out. I'm just late. I told you privately I missed the whole joint, and you were like, "Dang, how'd you miss it?" And I was like, "I miss a lot of stuff." So I apologize.
It's all good, man.
But definitely want to check it out. And yeah, man. Hey, man, Davey, I appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you, Jared.
I thank you for coming through. Definitely thank you for coming through the remix last week and dropping some important stuff on Shock G. And these quarantine mixes you've been doing, I hope people check those out as well on Mixcloud and elsewhere. BreakdownFM, DaveyD on Mixcloud. Google it if you don't already know. Mr. DaveyD, so that you don't miss anything. And hey, man, shout out to you, man. Good looking out. I appreciate you.
And let me just say, you know, for people listening, we always have these debates like football teams.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, there's some corny.
Me and Jared always have these debates, man. So it's
man.
All
there's
love.
Some corny folks that always, you know, misunderstand stuff wherever. You know, look. One of the problems, and I appreciate you bringing that up because a lot of people look. Disagreement, debate is not a negative, man. Nobody's so like look, man. I mean, I don't know, man. Anyway, we do this all the time. It's all good.
We're not going to hang up the phone and be like, damn, that Jared Ball.
And I want to say, you know what? Speaking of which, Davey, I want to say this, man. I think I don't know if I've said this publicly to you, but I want to shout you out for something because I've talked about this a lot over the years since it happened. We had a disagreement some years ago over something on Facebook. I don't forgot who reached out first. Got on the phone and got all straightened out, clear, and have moved on. And not everybody does that, man. And I just appreciate that. So I want to shout you out for doing that. I don't know if I'm lagging all of a sudden, but I really appreciate you doing that. And I don't know. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to big that up.
The context, this is food for thought for people to look at. I'm always a strong believer that people should look at all these different contexts. I think we all love Black people. I think we all we want to see our people do better. And, you know, and we're just giving, at least I'm trying to just give these other angles to a larger argument that people can dig into. But now we all brothers at the end of the day.
Of course. So, and honestly, you cannot understand the history of hip hop if you don't know Davey's work. So if anybody is unfamiliar, get familiar. I meant it when I said he is a legend in this. And, I got to get caught up to the latest. So again, thanks, Davey, man. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man. Have a good one. And a big shout out to the work y'all are doing, man. This is looking pretty slick, man. This is This is nice.
We getting there, man. We learning, man. Look, I told you years ago. I followed you into. I was trying to do a version of you out here with the mixtape thing.
Yeah,
and you know, I mean, your journalism. I mean, you've laid it down, man. So I'm still trying to, we are building here. And
you got a nice team, a nice crew, and stellar guests. We
do pretty good with the yes, right?
Yeah, I'm like, man, you got these people. I need to get some of these names and numbers. So.
Oh, absolutely, of course. And then we got DaveyD coming through. That's wrapping it up for the day. Save the best for last on this one.
But let me get these kids to school. You all have a good one, and peace out.
Early
everybody.
out your way, man. Take care, man. Peace to you, DaveyD. Thanks
all
again,
right,
man. All right, everybody, man. Thanks again to DaveyD. Thanks again, of course, to Dhoruba, Charo Mina Rojas, and Ajamu Baraka. It's been a great morning for me. I couldn't think of a better way to spend a Monday morning. I really appreciate all of you for coming through. We had a good, strong audience all morning. Thanks to everybody. Agree, disagrees, whatever. It's all good. Appreciate you. So we'll be back 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Remix morning show with the full crew. A lot of I already got some stories. I can't wait. So I don't know what everybody else is coming with, but it's going to be woo. And so we got the whole rest of the week with remix. And on Friday, again, I want to say we're going to have a nice, I can't wait to have this discussion. I don't know if I'm going to see if I get his permission to share the paper before Friday, because Professor Nimtz, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct, his critique of Cedric Robinson is fascinating. In terms of going back to this issue of debate and sort of comradely disagreement. I'm going to ask if I could share that beforehand. It'd be great if people could read it and then join us Friday morning. And then I'm going to be, that would be, wait a minute. That's Monday morning. I'm messing up. Hold on a second. Let me get that right. That's Monday. That's a week from today, because Friday is going to be all Barrett Brown. That's what's happening. Sorry about that. I think I misspoke earlier. And if you don't know Barrett Brown, you got to check out his work, because his story is fascinating. His criticism of our media environment and its relationship to the state is fascinating. His new information, which he's going to get into with us on Friday, about surveillance, the FBI, what to do when they show up at your house, like it's been the case with him, his political imprisonment. I mean, there's so much. And if you haven't read it, like, you got to check out, not only did this dude get locked up for exposing or allegedly exposing state private company surveillance media stuff, but he built with his fellow incarcerated. I mean, he built with folks in the prison. Like, it's kind of like my internal joke. I didn't say this to him, but my internal joke has been like, he's kind of like a new generation digital John Brown type, maybe. I don't know, man. But fascinating stuff, and I definitely want to start to do more to bring that kind of critique and analysis into our discussions here, because I don't think enough of us are doing it, to be honest. I don't think enough of us are having these kinds of conversations. So he's got some new stuff he's working on that he's going to talk with us about too. So that's Friday. So a lot here on Black Power Media. In case you missed it, because it didn't air as planned Friday night, definitely go back and check the latest Renegade Culture with Mukasa Willie Ricks and others. Anyway, there's just a lot of great stuff on the channel. So get your good organic soul food media diet at Black Power Media. Anyway, thanks again to everybody. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. Shout out again to everybody who kept the vigorous chat and discussion going lively and all of that good stuff. And we'll see you next time here at I Mix What I Like Live, and more broadly speaking at Black Power Media. Peace, everybody.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.